Welcome Wargamers to a lore week that I have been excited to do for years. This series of videos will be all about the Ogor Mawtribes, one of the latest battle tomes to drop from Games Workshop for Age of Sigmar, combining Beastclaw Raiders and several of these small splintered sub-factions of Ogre into basically a cohesive army. In short, the Ogres are back together and I'm so excited for this series. And now to kick it off, right, to set the tone for our conversation about this faction, I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about this the entire time that we're discussing this army. Because it's a question that's going to define every conversation that surrounds the faction. And a question that's full implications are hard to grasp and terrifying to see. So here is the question. What does it look like for a society to be utterly devoted to a single thing, and not just like one, random thing, right? Whether it's like commerce or pursuit of science or something like that, or even something as broad as survival, because that can mean a lot of different things, right? You figure, for example, like Carriage and Overlords survived, but they did it a very different way using science and technology and engineering and that kind of stuff. But I mean, what if you were devoted to a single thing that was super primal? The entire scope of your worldview and your language, government, and religion was all centered around one instinctive primal need. As we explore Mawtribes this week, we're going to see what that looks like. Their specific need, right, the sole focus of the entire race is the need to eat. And it's not just like gluttony or like overindulgence. It is a part of that, and it certainly carries its themes here and there. But it's this more than that. It's this primal need to devour, an inability to be satisfied. The ogres of the mortal realms can eat just about anything, even dirt and sand, which is an incredible ability if you think about it, right? Because any other army, like a Cities of Sigmar army, they have to have huge supply lines and carry their food with them. No, ogres can just eat wherever they go, so that's a huge military advantage. But we aren't talking about hunger as we know it. Right, this is something far darker than that. It goes much deeper into their character. And so, as we said with our question, it is the single focus that everything this week is built upon. So we want to keep that in mind. And so now I want to transition into talking about the Mawtribes as a whole. And like all other destruction factions, you can really understand them and their beliefs based on their perception, worship, and understanding of Gorkamorka, who seems to be the catch-all deity of just destruction factions realms-wide. Now, I was kind of curious about this since they so heavily wrote Gorkamorka, or Gork and Mork when they're separated, as the god of the Ironjaws, Bone Splitters, and Gloomspite Gits, right? Greenskins, right? And he was kind of mentioned here and there in the Beastclaw Raider book, but I feel like we didn't have nearly as good a definition of Gorkamorka at that point, because it was so early in Age of Sigmar's, timeline. When the book was literally released, the writing was very different as far as lore goes a couple years ago. And the Beastclaw Raider book really wasn't my favorite when it came to lore, because there was a lot of theories, but nothing really specific outside of the role of specific units. But we get a bit more information in this book, in the Mawtribes Battle Tome. We know that Gorkamorka is indeed the green-skinned god. That is how they describe him. He's the green-skinned god. But to the ogres, they call him the Gulping God, because Gorkamorka is the devourer of the realms. And this makes a lot of sense. For example, we talked about in Gloomspite Gits, the various sub-factions there see the power of Gorkamorka looking different, right? He's the moon and the spider of the Spider Fang. He's represented by the bad moon for pretty much all the other ones, but you know what I mean? They can all look at different aspects and see their deity in him, and in this, it is hunger. The devouring of everything around him. Gorkamorka is the eater of mountains, the drinker of oceans, a great maw that can never be filled or satisfied. And it doesn't go around devouring things like locusts, right, where it's a bunch of tiny mouths all biting a little bit. No, this is feast by conquest, war, and triumph. Massive ogres eating away at entire cities and nation-states. A few large hulking brutes set on devouring everything around them. And what I've found in this book is that they really harp on Gorkamorka as the Great Maw. In their ceremonies, they channel the power of this Maw, right? It leads them to food, it leads them to war. So don't get confused, like, if I intermingle those words or kind of slip them up. Gorkamorka is the Maw. The Maw that eats the realms belongs to Gorkamorka. It's his mouth. So that's the top of the pyramid, right? That's the top of the food chain for a faction that's all about food. The thing this faction reveres and wants to emulate, but what is the basic ogre like? Well, they stand roughly at twice the height of a normal person. Very large, broad stature with a huge gut, and it's easy to mistake them for just really, really big fat guys, but there is quite a bit of muscle beneath that blubber layer, which in fact acts as an incredibly thick natural armor, protecting a monumentally strong beast within it. Ogres are absurdly tough and possess a raw physical strength. They're able to rip enemies to shreds with their bare hands on the spot and begin devouring their prey with these sharp, shark-like teeth before they're even dead. This strength also obviously comes in useful in warfare because ogres are not the brightest in the realm, so complex weapons tend to not be their thing. There's a few outliers, we'll talk about those later, but the sheer strength they possess, even a basic club or a piece of scrap metal, becomes an unstoppable weapon in their hands. It's just enough force behind it. There are cannons and such, like I said, where it gets a little bit more complex later on. We'll talk about that when we talk about units. And when we talk about the Mawtribes in general, understand there's two distinct types of ogre and I guess sub-factions within there, right? There's the Gutbusters, who are the ones on foot, the typical ogre, and then there's this little subset called the Beastclaw Raiders. In this video, I'm going to focus more on the Gutbusters, and we'll cover the Beastclaw Raiders in another video. But on a high level, here's a very simple way to explain it. Gutbusters are the vast majority of ogres. At some point, some of those ogres were cursed with a magical storm that chases them, and they have kind of splintered off to become the Beastclaw Raiders. So BCR is kind of a subgroup of ogre. Regardless, all of them can work together if there is sufficient food at stake, but on the whole, they tend to avoid paths, because when they do meet, civil wars tend to happen quite regularly, and they don't get along very well for reasons we'll explain later on. But them clashing is not always a bad thing, right? Because killing other ogres provides a surplus of meat. Cannibalism is not a crime in this society, and any survivors from that war are absorbed into the winning Mawtribe, and so all of a sudden they can kind of just intermingle a bit so that you can have a mix of Beastclaw Raider units in your Gutbusters and so forth. It's all under one Mawtribe. And talking about that society a bit more, every group or mass of ogres is called a Mawtribe, as I mentioned before. And this kind of moniker extends to the Beastclaw Raiders as well. And I wanted to note that the units we'll explore this week are not the whole of the Mawtribe, right? We're talking about the warrior aspects of it. As with all these battle tomes, it's easy to think that this is representative of every single thing in that faction. No, I mean, Cities of Sigmar has people who live in the city but don't fight. Same thing here. There are ogres that stand on the home front, basically, cooking for the masses and raising children and building camps and that kind of thing. But we're talking about the military aspects of it specifically, and a standing army is called a war glut. One Mawtribe, right, one greater tribe, can have several of these standing armies, these war gluts, beneath them, sending them out at different times to go hunt and come back with food, allowing them to have numerous parts of their society. As one is leaving, another is just returning. And when everything is based on food, this constant rhythm of hunt and gather is essential. It keeps the wheels turning. Someone is always actively right then securing the next meal. But when we play Age of Sigmar, right, this part of the society is what we get to interact with, right? We play the units that make up a war glut. Boots on the ground soldiers, raiders, and devourers. These can range in size from a handful of scavengers to a massive army of hundreds, a living sea of fat flesh and hunger. Generally, each of these Gullets is led by a mighty tyrant, and heritage doesn't factor into leadership when it comes to this army. This is very much a might makes right. You have to challenge the previous leader, kill them in combat, and then you get to eat them because you won that meat and you assert yourself as the leader. Because of this strict hierarchy or understanding of might makes right, everyone instinctively listens to the tyrant. They follow his every command. And this tyrant is responsible for all martial discipline within the Wargla, conducting warfare, feeding the troops, and returning home with food. There is, however, one thing he doesn't do, and that is a job that belongs to the Warglet's Slaughtermaster. Right, the Slaughtermaster is responsible for steering the Warglet. He performs his own mysticism and scries messages and portents out of the gizzards and innards of their creatures they've killed, and from this he kind of discerns a path where Gorkamorka is leading them to next. So in kind of essentially what I'm saying is the tyrant is like a captain of the ship and the Slaughtermaster is the navigator. He kind of points them in the direction, but as far as the responsibility, the leadership, keeping things in line and keeping things moving, it's all down to the tyrant. Now, below these two leaders, they really are kind of the main, the highest of higher ups. There's a wide range of followers can come along, right? There's the Gut Guard, which is the personal honor guard of the tyrant, who is full of powerful ogres that one day will replace him by killing him and eating him, right? That's how you get your next successor leader. Below that, there's butchers working, diligently with supplying the army with their nightly meals under the Slaughtermaster. And all sorts of units can vary from Warglet to Warglet, and we'll cover all of those later in this series. And so why is this faction cool? I try to end every video with something like this. Well, as I said at the top of the episode, right, seeing an entire faction based around something as primal as hunger is fascinating, right? The core of the tribe stays back at their headquarters, right, their glut forts and things like that, constantly preparing food. They when I say preparing food, I mean they cut woods for giant fires, buildings that they're making and living in, scavenging for shards of metal to make pots and pans and resources out of. While the army, usually numerous, right, more than one kind of army out there, multiple Warglets, are in perpetual hunt and gathering cycles. Everything lives in motion, constantly devouring the environment around it. The hunts that the Warglets go on are really, really cool. So if you think about it, you have their base, right? They kind of leave their camp and do a big ring and come back with food. Just imagine they just walk around in a circle basically and come right back around with everything that they were able to capture and kill. Now the next hunt that goes out is going to do that same path, but it's going to be a bigger ring. And so you get these several concentric rings with these little detours that take them off on weird paths. And all of a sudden, they can start creating this almost like a drawing, if you're looking at it from the aerial view, of a giant maw, the one that they worship, the path that's been divined to them specifically by Gorkamorka. However, this hunting cycle all kind of got wonky with the Necroquake. The Slaughtermaster's divination skills went awry. They saw the Necroquake as, this is my favorite thing, Gork's grumble. And that is his stomach was grumbling because the deity didn't think that they were consuming enough, right? That they are the maw of Gorkamorka, and as a species, they were not eating enough stuff. And that's why his stomach is grumbling. So it's Gorkamorka's displeasure. And so now on top of their, normal survival aspects, they have this kind of religious fanaticism that's kind of slowly building as they get more and more concerned with the idea of we're not eating enough. We need to hunt more. We need to grow more ogres so we can send out on bigger and more numerous hunts. And it's really, really cool. All in all, I'm happy with the lore they added to the Gutbusters specifically, because that's mainly what I was focusing on here. I feel like every unit has a place. I was kind of curious about how they were going to fit together with the different kind of butchers they had and that thing. I really do feel like they gave everyone a reason to be there, and I think that's really important. There are even battalions that represent that kind of place in society. For example, my favorite one was the Tyrant and his Gut Guard, right? The narrative idea of having a cadre of devout warriors that all kind of want to kill you and take your place has been a favorite of mine since I read something like that in the Khorne Battle Tome way back in the day. Butchers, like I said before, have a great place, kind of switching from being more like a support hero, but now they're oh no, this is the spiritual like leaders of the faction. I kind of like that. I thought that was a really good move. Practical and divine responsibilities, right? Prep the food and commune with Gorkamorka to point us in the right direction to head for our next meal. So in our last video, we were introduced to the Mawtribes, the catch-all term for how the ogre species organizes itself. These tribes of ogres build their religion, their government, and their lives off of their perpetual need to feed, seeing Gorkamorka as the great devourer of the realms, and themselves as an extension of Gorkamorka, who they revere as the Gulping God. Their mission is the consumption of all things, and for survival, and as a means of worship to their great deity. Now in that video I focused primarily on the Gutbusters element, right? The ogres that never had a battle tome before, but were brought into the greater army that is now Mawtribes alongside today's topic. And in that video I explained that there's a distinct subculture of ogres called the Beastclaw Raiders, and that's who we're going to be talking about today. One thing I want to add up top is that any Mawtribe can contain pockets of Beastclaw Raider units. It's not a this or that, right? They're not like so starkly separated. A Mawtribe that hunts in Gur can have 99%, Gutbuster units, and then a small group of like Mournfang cavalry, for example, or just a pair of, Beastclaw Raider units with them. But because of the unique curse and blessing that was placed upon this pocket within the ogre race, when enough get together, they form a unique subculture. This curse and blessing is the defining trait of the Beastclaw Raiders, and that is, of course, the Everwinter. A supernatural ice storm that constantly follows any Beastclaw Raider Alfroston. This is like how they're, what they would call a war glut, like their military structure is an Alfroston. And this storm that follows them has the intensity of a mobile ice age, constantly at their heels. The life of a Beastclaw Raider is one of constant motion, running ahead of this storm, and to aid in this, they often ride colossal mounts, right? Mournfang, Stonehorns, Thundertusks, creatures that can survive the extreme cold and, as an added bonus, share in the hunger that drives the Beastclaw Raider ogres themselves. The exact origin of the Everwinter is still unclear. Honestly, I was kind of hoping that this battle tome would clarify a few things. They really just kind of reiterated stuff that was in the old one. But there are a few kind of mentioned theories that I wanted to touch on. Some say that way back in the age of myth, the Beastclaw Raiders, as we know them now, were Gorkamorka's scouts and vanguard. When he went to war with bigger creatures and bigger armies and things like that, until at some point they betrayed their god in some way, and so the Everwinter is therefore a curse that was placed upon them. Some also, kind of in that same vein, think that at some point Sigmar was the one who cursed them with this storm, so it's kind of two similar origin stories, so that a god had cursed them with this. Lastly, there's the legend of how a Beastclaw Raider army opened up a prison of some kind of like winter god, some winter force that Nagash had imprisoned there. And so these powers, I guess, clung to the Beastclaw Raiders, gifting them, with more of a positive side, with endless cold. None of those legends are confirmed. Remember, this is a culture with absolutely no writing, no detailed history. All accounts that they pass down are through oral traditions from a race that isn't particularly great at talking and communicating. What is confirmed, though, is that the Gutbusters, which is basically just any ogre that doesn't have the Everwinter chasing them, see the storm as a clear curse of Gorkamorka and generally want nothing to do with the Beastclaw Raiders. Kind of see them as like outcasts, right? They acknowledge they're part of the same race. They'll, befriend Beastclaw Raiders over any other race, really, but at the end of the day, they don't like them that much. And so how is it that these factions can work together? Well, it goes back to what we discussed yesterday, and that is that might makes right. If you're in a war glut and you come upon the Alfroston of a Beastclaw Raider army, right? This is their two military structures clashing together, and you lose, any survivors are absorbed into that Beastclaw Raider army. And while Frostlords loathe to admit it, Gutbusters, those ogres on foot, have a lot of usefulness. Likewise, if the Warglut wins the combat, they absorb the Beastclaw Raider survivors. And with the incredible long lifespan of ogres, how much they're constantly moving to hunt or run away from the ice storm, whatever it is, they run into each other a lot over time. And that's how you can get this cool little intermingling and how pretty much any army, any Maw tribe can represent any mix of units. The only time they don't really fight to absorb one another is if they see a common enemy and there is decidedly enough food for both of them to walk away winners. Right? If the target is big enough and the food reward is appetizing enough, they can work together, but that truce is kind of generally short-lived. At the end of the day, these are, however, still ogres. A lot of what we talked about yesterday directly applies to them as well. A society based on hunger, hunting, and foraging, living in perpetual motion. But the difference is that they have adapted to a particular environment, right? And that's that snow-wreathed hellscape that follows them, and they carry that environment wherever they go. Now, as far as how they move and how they hunt and things like that, they are not bound to the concentric hunting pattern rings that I talked about yesterday. Instead, they kind of just go wherever they can find food and warmth. Their paths can zigzag, they can loop, whatever you need to do to just keep moving out of the storm's path. Now, one thing that was added to their lore that I do like was that the Beastclaw Raiders were really affected by the Necroquake. We've talked about the Necroquake as this singular event that changed a lot of stuff in the Age of Sigmar timeline. Every faction has reacted to it in some meaningful way. For them, this event completely destabilized magic across the realms, and while it did mess up the hunting paths of the Gutbusters like we talked about yesterday, it had a much more pronounced effect upon the Beastclaw Raiders. The Everwinter that has trailed them for centuries began to flux wildly, right? Instead of this consistent storm that they had kind of grown to build this life around and depend on in terms of, it's very stable, right? Whether it's good or bad is up to opinion, but it is a very stable, thing from generation to generation. Well, for some Alfrostans, it grew in intensity to the worst storm they've ever seen and encased the entire civilization in thick ice. And they are stuck there, like kind of in suspended animation, right? They're all alive, they're all conscious, they're all groaning with hunger pains, just waiting to thaw. However, for some, and these are kind of obviously the ones that are ones you can play on the table, the snows began to dissipate. Right, a stark change to the frigid and harsh existence that they've endured for so long. That is that the Everwinter has almost relented. There's still a thing that follows them around, it lingers upon them, but it's not the same kind of life that they've always lived. The Huskards, who are the priests of the Beastclaw Raiders, warn everybody, this is just temporary, right? They're sensing that some disturbance happened and assuming that things will kind of mellow out in the end and things will go back to, quote-unquote normal. But none of them know the full extent of the Necroquake and how long it will take the realms to heal. And again, this is another way where we can see reasonably why Gutbusters and Beastclaw Raiders have a reason to work together, right? Because if you push them away because something's wrong because you're clearly cursed by Gorkamorka, and then the storm goes away. Does that mean he lifted his curse? They don't know, right? We as the readers know that, oh no, there's something much bigger going on, but they don't understand that within the story. And now as I end all these videos, let's talk about why this is cool. Why are the Beastclaw Raiders an interesting kind of subset of ogre? Mawtribes is a very interesting book, right? This two distinct flavor of ogre here at the Gutbusters and the Beastclaw Raiders, but there is on the surface very little connecting the two, right? If you like one over the other, that's great because they feel different. But if you were looking for a combined ogre army, I'm not sure they nailed it. I kind of wish they had either, had the Everwinter fully dissipate, and all of a sudden you have these people who are experts in certain environments, coming back to the fold, and that was kind of the drama as of reintegration. I'm not sure if that's it, but they still feel a little bit too distinct for having rules-wise no reason not to be. The Beastclaw Raiders seem like this little sub-faction that is very distinct and shunned, but at the same time, for army purposes, they need to bring them together. And I think this explains the idea of one army absorbing the other, right? And the idea of the Necroquake relenting. This kind of gives you a little bit of reason to be like, okay, this is why I can take a little from here and a little from there, you know, and splash it together. But I just didn't feel like, I wish there was more stories of them being combined as one army. That being said, I really like both sides of the ogre coin, right? This little micro society built on a harsh environment that they take with them everywhere they go, right? The Everwinter, despite not really being explained, is still a blessing and a curse. It keeps them in constant motion lest they get trapped in an ice prison, but they've also learned to adapt to it and channel it as their magics and their powers, right? The Huskards, their priests, channeling the ice power to use as a weapon upon their prey. And as we'll explore the lore for the Beastclaw Raider units, they have adapted extremely well to this environment. Finding and breeding hardy beasts to carry them on hunts, they have become just as important to their society as the prey that they hunt. And all in all, I got the same kind of vibe that I did when I read the Sylvaneth book, right? Where the Sylvaneth, if you haven't seen it, they have this little subculture called the Outcasts, right? This kind of, you know, malign group with a little mysterious origin that no one really knows about. They can all work together, but the Outcasts are kind of pushed away a bit. And with the Everwinter relenting a bit, I kind of feel that same thing, right? There is Mawtribes with a capital M, and then there's also this subsection called Beastclaw Raiders, who are fully part of the army and can be integrated, you know, whenever you're building the list, completely and utterly. And there's great reasons to have a mix of things lore-wise, but they do seem kind of to be a subset off to the side a little bit. And that's everything I have on the top level about Beastclaw Raider. And so the next couples of videos we're going to be doing is diving into the individual units that make up the army. Welcome back, Wargamers, as we continue our exploration of the Ogor Mawtribes. Now, previously in this series, we've discussed the Gutbusters and the Beastclaw Raiders, right? These two distinct but forever intertwined cultures in the greater ogre race. And while those videos focused on the lore of them individually, today I want to step back and talk about how they function kind of on the macro level, right? From the bird's eye view. Because as I mentioned, hopefully in both those videos and made very clear, it's not all Gutbusters or all Beastclaw Raiders within a Mawtribe. It certainly can be, if that's what you'd like, but many of them, I would dare say most of them, are intermingled. The reason being, this is a race that instinctually understands that might makes right. When a bunch of Gutbusters meets a tribe that is predominantly Beastclaw Raiders, they fight over resources and also to assert dominance. The victor will absorb the surviving ogres from the other army, and all of a sudden you get these really, really big Mawtribes that are a great mix of Beastclaw Raider units as well as Gutbusters. In this way, Alfrostons have large herds of Beastclaw Raiders, but there's a few Gutbusters with them, or Wargluts that have several Beastclaw Raider units. No matter the composition of these units, all that matters is that everyone acknowledges a single leader, and that leader is constantly guiding them towards their next meal. And that's how a stable Mawtribe can exist with this mix of units and things like that. And these Mawtribes exist all over the mortal realms. They're all highly nomadic, right? Moving into ever-expanding hunting grounds. There's a ton of freedom to design a very personalized Mawtribe to fit whatever collection you own or want to own. That being said, Games Workshop gives us 6 distinct Great Mawtribes. These are the ones that stand out, right? Tribes so widely renowned for their power and their hunger and the devastation that they cause. And we're going to be exploring them all right now. Keep in mind, these are colossal groups. Any one of them can really honestly muster any unit that you want just due to their sheer size. So even within these specific Mawtribes, they might focus on a particular type of unit leaning towards Gutbusters or leaning towards Beastclaw Raider, but they can, because of the nature of how large they are and how many other Mawtribes they've conquered and absorbed, can field whatever they want. First up is the Meatfist Mawtribe, and this is likely the most successful Mawtribe there is. Their hunting ground seems to be the largest in the realms, which is kind of a testament to how long they've been around as a coherent force, right? Remember I said they keep making these concentric rings that get bigger and bigger as they keep hunting more and more places. Well, that's a testament to how long they've been going, is just the size of their hunting ground. And their home of it's called the Great Gut Fort, seems to be without equal. They boast the most ogres of any Maw tribe in the realms, and this has led them to massive success, because now they can absorb other Wargluts and Alfrostons regularly, only fueling the inertia, right, of this army further. They are distinguished by the bloody red stained hand that they all bear. And this is a symbolic gesture, harkening back to the Maw tribe's first over tyrant, the guy who was in charge of all of the different Wargluts. His name was Grawl Meatfist, who defeated a colossal creature called a Titanox. And the way he killed it was he stabbed the beast with one hand, right, just straight up through the thing's hide, and then tore out its insides. And so that gesture of the red hand, which tore the beast's heart out, is what they try to emulate. Grawl was said to be stronger than any other ogre, and the Meatfists believe that his bloodline continues in them. Now, they are not silent about this grandiose origin story and how they think that they are, lineage-wise related to a great ogre, becoming one of the most boastful and arrogant Maw tribes out there, to the point where other Maw tribes get pretty agitated by them, right? You get tired of the guy who's constantly boasting about how great he is. Currently, their over-tyrant is Glob Glittermaw, a cunning ogre who leads the tribe in a very unique way. You see, typically, ogres eat everything. It's kind of been a theme we've been talking about all week, right? But they'll eat jewels, gems, precious metals, anything like that. But Glob has corralled his followers to store some of the shinier things, and actually conducts trade with other cultures. And here's the thing, we don't normally think of commerce as a weapon, right? But it is a deadly new skill for this race. And with that wealth, Glob has secured weapons, black powder, food, and more. He hosts these grandiose feasts, and he's always looking to outdo himself. Every party and celebration and meal has to be bigger than the last. But that cunning of using resources in a different way rather than just eating everything, that kind of, I guess we would call it like a vision for what could be versus what's right in front of you, is really, really entertaining. And while they have a lot of enemies, particularly the Stormcast Eternals, Chaos, and other Maw tribes, the Meatfists only perceive these threats as like a smorgasbord of food coming towards them. Our next Maw tribe hails from the realm of Akshi, it's fire, and these are the Blood Gullets. Boasting more butchers and slaughter masters than any other Maw tribe, they have become masters of the blood magics and divination available to them. Think of them as like the wizard magic prayer focused Maw tribe, if you will. From them, the power and spirit of Gorkamorka is in the blood. That's their belief. Everything centers around blood. So while all Maw tribes see food and the act of consuming it to be the end goal, the Blood Gullet has an added edge that it's the blood of the realms that Gorkamorka seeks. Cooking meat to them is just super evil, right? It's disgraceful. It sullies everything, putting them at odds with the Firebellies, right? Shamans who use fire to burn their victims. Their method of warfare involves a lot of hacking and slashing, spilling as much blood as possible, being sure to drink every drop that they can. There's even a story about how he'll hit, say for example, like a free guild soldier in the neck, and then the ogre will stop fighting, pick that guy up, and just literally drink out of him, almost like a vampire, but it's a huge, massive, gaping wound, just to make sure not a drop is lost. Before any battle, the Maw pot is filled with boiling blood from their last trophies, and the butchers then bless this blood, kind of imbuing it with this dark arcane power, and sprinkle it upon all of the ogre warriors. It reddens their skin, bulks them up with this extreme power and resilience, and they go out and get some more blood. Now, of course, there are a few dots here that savvy viewers can connect. We're in Akshi, Realm of Fire, and we have people who love blood. So the natural question to me was, how do they fit in with Khorne? Well, I'll tell you, that's actually part of their lore. One thing this book has driven home for me is the fact that ogres are not strictly hostile with other races. The Blood Gullet Mawtribe has worked alongside Khorne armies numerous times. In fact, Corgus Kull, Mighty Lord of Khorne, who was kind of like the picture-perfect Khorne leader during the Realmgate Wars, is said to have a butcher on his council named Horg Blacktooth. And I thought that was fantastic. Next up are the Underguts Mawtribe, and I really like the origin story for this one because it fits them squarely within the greater Age of Sigmar timeline, so let's get into it. The Underguts hail from Ulgu, Realm of Shadow. It's a land of darkness, fog, deception, very dangerous landscapes to try and navigate. Living in that environment are all kinds of shifty creatures, right? Hunting among the shadows, using venoms and toxins and traps to ensnare their prey. There was also a great big Mawtribe of ogres. Because their diet consisted of all these venomous and dangerous creatures, and the lack of sunlight, their skin took on this sickly green hue. And they've been in Ulgu as far back as the Age of Myth, carving a life out for themselves in this incredibly harsh environment. But it's harsh in a different way than the Everwinter or something like that. It's just a very unique thing that we know about in Ulgu. But the Underguts story, as we know them, starts during the Age of Chaos. And to properly explain this, we need to kind of go on a little side story. As we explored in the Cities of Sigmar series, the Dispossessed were rocked particularly hard by the coming of chaos. Many rune lords thought everything would blow over, right? All we'll do is we'll just batten down the hatches, fortify our homes, and brace ourselves for war. One of those such empires was Kazakh Fulgar, located in Ulgu as well. They were masters of gunpowder weapons. They made this unique blend of environmental specific ingredients to have the most potent gunpowder and in massive reserves laying around. They had guns for days and thought themselves safe from the ravages of chaos. However, they did not account for the other predators in the realms. It's not all chaos during the Age of Chaos. The ogres here saw the gun fort of Kazakh Fulgar and marveled at the sight and sound of their gunpowder weapons. The ogres wanted that for entertainment as much as utility. And so the Mawtribe descended upon the Duardent fortress, wiping them out to a man. They put the Gnoblars with them to work, designing a crude copy of their famous gunpowder. The Mawtribe then ripped the cannons from the fortress wall and stockpiled obscene amounts of ammunition, gunpowder, and weapons. Now this move did two things. It gave them a staggering number of Leadbelchers and Ironblasters, right, using all the cannons they just pilfered and all the gunpowder they have. And we'll explore those units a bit more in depth later. But in short, just a lot of guns. Guns for days. And it also gave them, secondly, a unique way to hunt. Other Mawtribes do that circular loop we were talking about and go back to their home base. The Underbellies started to do this, renaming Kazakh Fulgar as Mount Bellow, but they soon realized there was another way to hunt that they now had access to. With the gunpowder in their possession, they could blast their way around Ulgu, carving these deep tunnels, allowing them to ambush prey or get around defenses. So all of a sudden, they come across a civilization that's, well defended behind their big, sturdy walls. Well, those walls turn into, the rim of a buffet table all of a sudden when ogres pour out from inside the fortress because they tunneled their way underneath. In addition to that, they are also known to work with the Gloomspite Gits. Both societies prefer to shroud themselves in darkness. The ogres, specifically these ones in Ulgu, like to join them in nighttime raids. So I like that story quite a bit because I feel like it gives them the most context in terms of keeping them relevant to the main timeline of what's going on. I thought that was a great touch. Next up, we're talking about the Boulderhead Mawtribe, led by the Frost King Bragath Vardruk. The ogres of the Boulderhead are some of the most fearsome and resilient ogres within the realms. They call themselves the Sfjard, old Beastclaw Raider tongue for unbreakable ones. They see themselves as the rightful heirs and kings of the ogre race, seeking to dominate all of their other kin. They have a deep focus on martial prowess and pride themselves on how many mounts they have in their army, meaning like all the different thunder tusks and stone horns and that kind of thing. And they have bred these beasts into being some of the toughest in the realms. It actually describes this really cool bonding ritual, and I'm always really curious whenever Games Workshop takes time to say like how rider and mount kind of like work together, because a lot of times in these books they seem to be like on the same page, even though one's an animal, one's theoretically smarter than an animal. But this one is really, really interesting to me. Let's take, for example, a Mournfang cavalry, right? You have an ogre and you have the Mournfang beast itself. The ogre will take a knife, cut a part, just a huge sliver, right, of his own fat off of his body. Now they're super fat, they're super thick, very tough, this doesn't hurt them that much. And they feed it to the Mournfang. And then they walk over to the Mournfang and cut a huge hunk of them, and they, as the ogre, eat that. So they exchange each other's flesh, basically, to bond them to their mounts. And this connection allows the mount to basically, it's like a weird trust thing, right? Like, I know you're not going to hurt me. You've eaten my flesh. You're not going to turn around and hit me and eat me some night. All of a sudden, the mount will trust the rider instinctively and just ride straight into cannon fire, whatever. There's no fear. It just does whatever the ogre tells it to do. To further add to their destruction, the ogres in this Maw tribe regularly, with a disciplined nature, eat rocks and steel. See, ogres are very much, they are what they eat, right? And this toughens up their skin to the point where there's this myth and this rumor that they can headbutt a cannonball out of the sky, which is the coolest sounding thing I think I've ever heard from this battle tome. Like I said, a big focus here, other than food and dominance, is to unify the ogres under their command. While they think they think generally very little of Gutbusters, they have conquered many war gluts, so the numbers are swelling up, right? The leader there, he knows you have to have numbers if you're going to go against some of these other larger Maw tribes, so he tolerates them being around. Continually, however, they are denied their goals. Because other Maw tribes are so scornful and distrusting of the Boulderhead, they'll work together to fight them away, right? And a level of teamwork means a great deal in this army where they just generally absorb each other. But the fact that two tribes are like, this third guy is such a jerk, let's just work together and get rid of him. And that's exactly what's happening, is the Boulderhead can't assert their dominance because everybody else hates them so much for trying to do so, they keep getting pushed back. They are like these elite outcasts of the Maw tribes, seeing themselves as rightful rulers and using a combination of deadly mounts and tough ogres to win the day. Next on our list here are the Thunderbellies. This is an example of environments of the realms affecting ogres and how that looks when you throw in the Everwinter. Described as a young tribe relative to others, the Thunderbellies come out of Chamon, Realm of Metal, making their home on a series of what's called sky roads. Think of these as colossal pathways that traverse the very scattered and disparate parts of Chamon. The alchemical instability of the realm and the Everwinter have kind of warped together almost. The mounts of this Maw tribe, particularly the Mournfang, have been imbued with the power of the storm, giving off this electric shimmer of light as they run. And this is what happens when a lightning storm fuses with the Everwinter. Because of the saturation of magic on the sky roads, their Huskards and their Butchers are particularly adept at channeling magics and the raw power of this storm. Now, I'll be honest, there's not a ton of lore for this one, but there are a few things that I wanted to point out in specific. One of their favorite pastimes, almost like a rite of passage, is trying to eat lightning, much in the same ways that you and I, when it's the first snow of the year, we'll go outside and stick our tongues out and try to get a snowflake on our tongue. Same thing, except they're trying to catch lightning bolts. And for some of the ogres, they're not quote-unquote worthy and they get fried instantly and killed, but for many of them, they can take the punishment, and so it's a fun little game they play. The book also says they only speak at a deafening bellow, and that's partially because they're so used to their voices competing with the wind and the thunder that they're constantly yelling at each other, and that's just how they are used to talking now. And the last part of this lore section I thought was particularly interesting. So since they can eat lightning, they've developed a taste for what they call lightning meat. And what lightning meat is, it's the arc of energy that fires into the sky when a Stormcast Eternal dies. And in fact, many chambers are reporting that Stormcast Eternals are not being reforged, and that is a huge deal. The last bit is that their position on these sky roads allows them the constant movement that they need to stay ahead of the Everwinter. Access to Chamon's storm magics, or a fresh supply of prey, because everybody wants to control the sky road. It's a great tactical important place. However, the shift to these higher areas and a focus on the storm constantly puts them at odds with the Beasts of Chaos. That's kind of like their boogeyman, because the Dragon Ogre Shaggoths, if you remember that lore video, are up in the high peaks, and they are basically beasts born of the storm. They love the lightning and the storms and all that kind of stuff like that, and so they're competing constantly with their magics and who has supremacy over that part. And the last of the Great Mawtribes is also one of the more mysterious ones, and that is the Winterbite Mawtribe. Hailing from Gur's tundra regions, their adaptation is a bit different. Instead of a thunderous charge or a full frontal assault, instead you are surrounded by a thick, freezing fog. And slowly, the people in your army get picked away by these shadowy figures, and all you hear is screaming, but you can't see anything because of the, isolating, thick fog. There's zero visibility. And it's only when you are scared and disorganized does the hammer descend with the beasts of stark white fur charging into your lines. What makes the Wintermaw unique, above all, is that their relationship to the Everwinter. We see whenever the Everwinter is discussed, despite not being fully explained, it's always mentioned that some see it as a blessing and some see it as a curse. The thing is, we don't really see the ogres who view it as a blessing until this book. The ogres here see the Everwinter that surrounds them as the breath itself of Gorkamorka, the divine gift that allows them to hunt and stalk the realms without equal. To maximize this gift, the ogres wear white pelts and they breed their beast to an ivory white fur, and all of this acts as the perfect camouflage within the Everwinter's grasps. And it makes them extremely unique, because when I say camouflage, right, subtlety is not a dominant feature in this faction if you haven't picked up on it this week so far. But as mentioned yesterday, the best Beastclaw Raider Mawtribes have adapted to this environment that they carry with them, and I don't think anyone else has done it as well as these. Their reverence for this fog in Everwinter goes super far. They'll leave victims, sometimes alive, for the storm to consume, which doesn't sound like a big deal until you consider the lengths that ogres go for food. They take this worship and their gratitude for the Everwinter very, very seriously. And I actually really like that this Mawtribe, because it offers something different, a totally unique spin than the other Mawtribes, and I love it for that. Now, why are all of these Great Mawtribes really cool? And I won't spend a ton of time here because they all have their own reasons for why they're really cool. But I like seeing how each Mawtribe has evolved to its environment, but also to other Mawtribes and societies. Working with others, trying to conquer other Mawtribes, living in a storm, in the fog, shadow, caves. It's a very adaptable race, and it's likely what allowed them to survive the Age of Chaos. Most of the lore sections here each have at least alluded to the various types of ogres being combined. The Beastclaw Raider focused ones mentioned having Gutbusters with them, which I feel is important because I think a lot of the rest of this book lacks that, right? It feels like two armies were put together and there's just no reason you can't combine them, which is not the same thing as saying this is now a narratively combined force. Continuing our coverage on the Ogre Mawtribes, we're going to be diving into the individual units within the army. As is fitting, I thought we would do this by dividing up the Beastclaw Raider section and the Gutbusters sections, respectively, as these two factions under the greater Mawtribes umbrella have two distinct cultures, and of course, the difference is the presence of the Everwinter and how that shapes their life. And so today we're going to explore the various units of the Beastclaw Raiders section and touch on how they go to war, as well as how they keep themselves together and constantly hunting. Now, at a high level, each Alfroston, which is kind of the military structure within the Beastclaw Raiders, is led by a mighty Frost Lord. And they go to war with 3 specific troop organizations in mind, and there's kind of an asterisk with a 4th that kind of comes and goes. But when all put together, they form a deadly attack pattern that is devastating on their enemies. You see, when you are attacked by a Beastclaw Raider army, the first thing that hits you is the Yorlbad. This is the first thunderous wave of Mournfang and Stonehorns, and think of it kind of like as a blitzkrieg, right, but with animals instead of tanks. They rush the front lines of the enemy, and the idea is to push deep into the heart of whatever they're fighting against to shock and destroy and kind of put them in disarray. But this is all about speed and momentum, and so they'll happily leave, some prey alive behind them. The idea is just to keep going for the heart of the enemy. So like I said, they'll leave some behind, they'll shatter units but not everyone's dead, or they'll fail to pick up bodies to be eaten. Again, it's about charging the first wave. The idea here is that the enemy at this point will try to form some kind of counter-assault, right? The devastating charge came in and now the grinding battle can commence. And that is where the Earlbad comes in. This is the second wave, the second of these battle formations, and they move a bit slower. See, where the Jorlbad is about the fiery heat of battle, the Earlbad is about the frozen fist of the storm as it destroys any kind of counterattack. It cleans up any survivors and generally acts as this more slow, plodding, unstoppable tide. Together they create a 1-2 punch meant to disorient battle plans, kill enemies, and anticipate any kind of counterattack. Now that accounts for generally all of the military force within a Beastclaw Raider Alfroston or tribe or anything like that. But there is a third battle formation that comes up and supports the other two, as well as acts as its own devastating hammer, and that is the Torbad. The Torbad is the advisory council of the Frost Lord, but it's full of mystics and priests and spiritual leaders of the tribe. Put simply, the Huskard riding the Thunder Tusk. And they're able to channel the magics of the Everwinter on the battlefield, so they do damage in a very different kind of way, supporting the rest of the army and bringing the storm upon their foes. Now that fourth formation, the one that I guess that was kind of an asterisk, that is going to be the Skull, and these are the Hunters and the Frost Sabers that mostly act as scouting units for the army. Now here's the thing, there isn't a lot of units in this section, right? The vast majority of them are standard ogres riding different kinds of mounts. And so just about any of these units can be in the Jorlbad or the Earlbad. So I wanted to point out that the units that are more specific, more important, and for the rest of them, we'll have a discussion about the mounts and how they conduct themselves in combat, and that'll pretty much tell you all the units. So starting at the top, there is the Frost Lord. And this is the defining unit for this sub-faction, and I absolutely love their lore. They are the undisputed leaders of any kind of Alfroston or Beastclaw Raider focused tribe. His will is mandate, and it is his responsibility to keep the tribe fed and ahead of the Everwinter. And it's pretty standard stuff, right? It's similar to the Tyrant that we are going to be discussing when we tackle the basic Gutbuster units. But the real thing that stuck out to me about the Frost Lord is how he is chosen. See, I was expecting to be some grandiose thing where whoever is most blessed by the Everwinter, or as cold as the icy storm, or some kind of, very poetic thing like that. But it actually has my favorite lore for how to choose a leader. When a new leader of an Alfroston is needed, or an Alfroston just now forms, right, they need to pick one of them to be a leader, the oldest and the most veteran ogres go on a hunt. This is called the Rite of Hrothgar. All the biggest ogres go out and hunt the biggest single prey that they can find and return it to the tribe. Now at that point, everyone else in the tribe votes for who should be their leader by eating the meat of the ogre that they want in charge. Right? Whatever they brought back, their prey, the way that they vote is by eating of it. Whoever has the majority of the tribe eat of their spoils wins the vote. Now, I absolutely love this for a few reasons, right? At the top of the week, we talked about how the need to eat is reflected in every single part of ogre society: religion, lifestyle, ethics, and now in this case, government. This is what hunger-based democracy looks like, right? Everybody gets a fair and equal vote, which is something more than can be said for, other armies. We have Black Library lore where like nepotism is all over, the free guilds and that kind of stuff. No, none of that here. It's all merit-based. You have to go out and hunt to bring back your right to be entered as a Frostlord. But the bigger thing in this is that the qualification for leadership of an ogre army, right, specifically the Beastclaw Raiders, this is their kind of subculture, stems from your ability to provide for others. And I think that's a really interesting thing, right? It's a cool way to demonstrate this is all about food. This is all about provision. You need to provide for us, and in so doing, we will put our trust in you. And at every level of society, it's about choosing those who can provide food and leadership. Now, in addition to all that, it's super practical. There's no leader, right? At the time when you're choosing a leader, there isn't one. Everybody needs to eat, and so everyone go out and hunt, and then when we were voting on our next leader, boom, there's already like a celebratory feast going on, right? Because all those hunters, even the ones who didn't win to become Frostlord, have brought back food. All of a sudden, on the spot, we voted, and there's a big feast ready for us to celebrate. This also means that to get the amount of votes you need to go out and hunt something that your tribe finds particularly tasty, but also the bigger the spoil, meaning what you hunt, the more meat there is. Therefore, the more votes you have available to you. So everyone scatters to find the biggest, tastiest thing they can, and that's how they choose it all. Now, moving below the Frostlord in terms of leadership are the Huskards, and they come in two flavors based on their mount. What's important about the title of Huskards is that they kind of act as advisors in different capacities for the Frostlord, right? They bring his will to different aspects of the battle, because he can't be everywhere at once. They are his, lieutenants, right, on the field enacting his will. Huskards on Stonehorn act as military leaders. These are the ones that are going to be leading either the Yorlbad or the Earlbad, and they take their roles very seriously. Again, these act as the leaders for these battalions, and as mentioned, they form the 1-2 punch that makes the hunting and gathering of this tribe really, really work. So they are cunning, commanding, and terrifying. Huskards on Thundertusk, however, are a little bit different. They still act as advisors to the Frostlord. They're still in charge of a fighting force, meaning the Torbad, but they differ in how they conduct themselves in warfare, and how they fit into the greater Beastclaw Raider society. These are the priests of the Everwinter, deciphering its messages and channeling its fury into harsh primal magics. They don't have the same military might or responsibility per se, but they do have a lot going on in the battlefield, as well as the tribe's entire way of life from a religious standpoint. Now, below those main leaders, right, it kind of breaks down into a smattering of units. Really what it is, it's just ogres riding on the back of various mounts, and those mounts define their role within the army. And so we're going to touch on those, the mounts, and also the other various wild beasts and things that follow a Beastclaw Raider Alfroston. So rather than diving into what each individual unit is, I want to talk about the mounts, because it really is just an ogre riding blank. So we're going to kick it off with these Stonehorns, and these are colossal creatures that are living battering rams that are a curious quirk of the realms. And it makes them fit seamlessly into the ranks of the Beastclaw Raider. Their bones are made from gems and rock-type materials, and they're covered in these thick, almost impervious hides. It'll make them all super resilient to damage. This is because of their unique diet. They eat rocks, metals, gems, and so on. And the nature of their diet gives them this near invincible physique and the ever-changing nature of their horns. So for example, if a Stonehorn eats a bunch of metal, they may develop tusks that have this iron-like appearance, right? The metallics that they eat start growing from their structure itself. And in terms of their diet, they work very well with Beastclaw Raiders, because anything that the ogres cannot eat, they will. They'll let the ogres eat a population of a town, and meanwhile, the Stonehorns will be outside eating the homes, the walls, and the structures that the ogres didn't want to eat in the first place. So in that sense, they don't act as rival predators. there's enough food to go around for both species, the ogre and the stonehorn, to live in harmony and serve one another. They also fit perfectly into Beastclaw Raider kind of lifestyle because of a terrible drawback they have. See, the dense skeletal structure of a stonehorn is always like condensing and changing and warping with new materials after eating. If a stonehorn remains still for too long, their joints begin to solidify and lock up, right? Think of it as like your bones start to fuse if you sit still too long. If they are left long enough, a stonehorn will become frozen in place, this colossal living statue unable of escape. And so it is that the nomadic and constant on the move from the Everwinter lifestyle of the Beastclaw Raider fits in perfectly with the natural strengths and drawbacks of this creature. It's almost like they were bred into existence for them. The next of the big important mounts is the Thundertusk, and I apologize if I've been getting these confused back and forth. Stonehorn and Thundertusk, they kind of just bleed together in my brain, I'm sorry about that, but the Thundertusk is very, very different, and there's not nearly as much lore given about them in terms of their like physiology like there was with the Stonehorn, but it's repeated that there's clearly something magical about them, that it's a very mythical kind of beast, right? They act as these nodes for powerful ice magic, blasting out freezing air, piercing hail, and frigid blasts. And you can imagine that a culture based on a perpetual ice storm, right? If they stumble upon a creature that is like this, right, just naturally, it seems mythical, it seems too good to be true, that there's just so much harmony between the two races. And so it is that those of the Torbad, meaning the mystics and the wizards and that kind of thing, ride these like living avalanches of frost and cold into battle, channeling the Everwinter through their mounts as well, devastating the enemy and acting as a cruel reflection of the storm itself. And the last of the beast mounts I really want to touch on are the Mournfang. This is actually my favorite. These are the stocky, aggressive mounts that make up the base cavalry of the Beastclaw Raiders. And they kind of look like a cross between a bull and like a saber-toothed cat, something like that, and they are bred for pure aggression in a super harsh way. When a cluster of Mournfang are born, a whelping pit is dug, and all the pups are placed inside with some meat to fight over. Think of a deep chasm. You just put all the pups in there, throw some meat in, and then the ogres leave for a time and come back later. Now when they come back, of course, the food is gone, the weakest of the pups has been eaten by the others, and only the meanest and most aggressive of the pack are still alive. These surviving Mournfang are then dragged out of the pit for their final trial. And the trial basically goes like this. An ogre walks up in front of one, and he holds out two hands. One hand is bare and open, the other one has food in it. Those Mournfang that bite the open hand are selected to become mounts. If they bite the food, they are either killed or used for breeding. The reason that they want the one that bites the open hand is they want to reward unbridled aggression, right? They want the beast that will fight first and eat later, and this keeps them from being rival predators on the battlefield, but also keeps them focused on a fight. If you have your main cavalry line charge into the enemy and immediately get bogged down because they're too busy eating to keep fighting, that's not good, right? You want the ones who are going to just keep fighting, keep being aggressive to the enemy until the battle's over, and then everyone can eat. And so now we're going to dive into the last couple of units here that just kind of tag along sort of with the army. You'll understand what I mean. So we're going to talk about the Icefall Yetis. This is an entry with very little actual information in it because the origins of the Yetis are not really understood. When a Beastclaw Raider tribe moves into the colder parts of any given realm, the Yetis come, possibly sensing a kindred spirit with the Beastclaw Raiders, or maybe just struck with wonder at the moving storm that is literally carrying their like natural environment elsewhere, right? They just want to tag along because, oh, we can go follow them and then we can explore the realms. They flock alongside the Alfrosten's Torbad, right? Just like the Thundertusks, they act as little focal points of ice magic, and the air around them shimmers and freezes. So at the deepest heart of the storm, with the people who are channeling all kinds of ice magic, that's where they want to be, wherever it's coldest. They don't eat much, and they add a lot of destructive power to the tribe, and so the ogres don't mind these kind of like hangers-on, right? They just kind of follow them around. The only thing that the ogres really complain about is the fact that when they go after the battle to eat all the meat and collect it all for food, anything that the Yetis have killed is just frozen solid, making it a little bit tougher to digest. Now, what did surprise me, that it kind of hinted at but didn't really develop at all, is the idea that the Icefall Yetis are more intelligent. Right? They have their own language, but it's too complex and described as being very eldritch in nature for the Beastclaw Raiders to really understand. But this idea that they are their own primitive race with language and traditions and stuff like that, I just thought that was very interesting. And rounding out the faction is the Skull, sort of like a scouting force within the tribe, and these are led by the Icebrow hunters. And these are the ogres that either through practice or some random blessing of Gorkamorka are natural-born hunters and trackers with a keen sense of direction. They act as the eyes and ears of the Alfrost and report to the Frost Lord alone. However, the Frost Lords are wary to bully them too much because they're just far too important. Right? The use of these trackers is to find the next meal, right? They search for grazing patterns of prey, they scout out enemy fortifications and things like that, just kind of giving everyone a heading. Where are we going next for our food? And honestly, that's pretty much everything there is about them, right? They're ogre loners, more at home in the wilderness than with the tribe, but they serve the tribe in a very important way. Now, along with them frequently are Frost Sabers. Yet another example of, the ogre race finding creatures that just cohabitate with them perfectly. And the Frost Sabers really are exactly what they look like. This fierce cat-like creatures with ice-cold blood, and they are the primary companion of the Icebrow hunters. The thing that's unique about them is that, as opposed to all the other mounts we talked about where they're subdued or they're raised in a very harsh way, these creatures are not raised in that kind of environment. Instead, an Icebrow hunter, when he finds a pack of them, whether through he just randomly stumbles onto a bunch of cubs after killing the mom or something like that, he actually raises them, makes sure they have food, teaches them how to hunt and that kind of thing. And it sounds like, oh, here's the one nice ogre that raises pets kind of thing. This is not really a sentimental act. These are beasts that are raised with a purpose to serve the hunter as guards and also just help him in his hunting, right? Be fellow hunters as a pack. They are collectively known as the Skull, which is the last kind of formation you can take. And they don't necessarily always fight with the main army. They can if the need arises. But as far as the Frost Sabers go, they really just hang on to the hunter. They are fiercely loyal to him and will easily go out and die for his sake. And that is pretty much everything there is about the Beastclaw Raiders. Like I said, I didn't go into individual units like the Mournfang Cavalry because the defining feature of that unit is the Mournfang, and then it's just an ogre on top. The same thing with the Stonehorn and the Thundertusk. They have those Beast Rider units where it's just two ogres riding on the back of it. Those really are just, here's an ogre riding these mounts. So I think that what's really cool about this faction and makes it very unique is that so much of the flavor of it is based inside the mounts and the creatures associated with it, even though it's an ogre army. From top to bottom, all those creatures that define the characteristics of it only are there because they fit into the lifestyle and the direction that these ogres are already headed in. And while it might seem crazy to think all these beasts just happen to fit into this very specific lifestyle, consider the fact that since the Everwinter was placed upon them in the Age of Myth, so now hundreds of years out, they have just been doing nothing but exploring functionally. Right? They just go random places where nobody else is really looking, so they can find these kinds of creatures in weird environments that just happen to work with them. And when you think exploring the near infinite space of the realms for hundreds of years, it's not so crazy to think that 3 to 4 species would maybe be just kind of fit well with how they work. But now that we're looking at them after the fact, right, once all the beasts are together, it is cool to see how all these different races, both in terms of animals and the ogres, fit together to make a cohesive environment, tribe, and lifestyle. So friends, that is everything I have about the Beastclaw Raider units. Tell me your thoughts down below. For me, my favorite of these is the Mournfang Cavalry. I love the backstory for how they raised these beasts, and the fact that their basic unit is a guy on a giant bull-like thing. I just think that's the coolest thing in the world. Welcome Wargamers, and in today's video we're going to wrap up our exploration of the Ogor Mawtribes by talking about the Gutbuster portion of the army. Remember, there are two distinct cultures within greater ogredom, I guess we could say, and that is the Beastclaw Raiders and the Gutbusters. And I have to say, I was so excited for this portion of the book because these are units that have barely been mentioned in Age of Sigmar books thus far, and now they're kind of getting added into a greater army. And keep in mind that Wargluts, right, which is the main military structure of Gutbusters, can still include many Beastclaw Raider units from competing tribes that they've run into and conquered. In addition, the units we're going to talk about, again, I just want to emphasize, represent the military portion of the civilization. There's still ogres back at home at the camp. This is just, again, the Wargluts. And with all that out of the way, let's jump into the individual lore of these units with a reminder that, of course, not every unit has the same amount of lore. And I've gotten some feedback from people wishing that I posted pictures of the units, like the actual models, as I talk about them, so we'll try it in this video. Let me know what you think. Starting off with the top of this meat mountain, right? The Tyrant is the rotund and terrifying leader of any Warglut, second only to the Over-Tyrant, who governs multiple Wargluts, but for the book Mawtribes, we don't see that level of hero, at least on the table. I made the analogy earlier of a Mawtribe being a ship, right? The Tyrant is the captain. He is solely responsible for making sure the Warglut is constantly on the move, always finding food and resources to bring back to the tribe. All ogres operate under a very simple, societal structure, and that is might makes right. The biggest ogre with the deepest appetite and biggest belt size reigns supreme. Tyrants need to be cunning, blunt, and aggressive if they hope to basically take leadership but also survive it, because they are often the target of challenges for supremacy, having to maintain their authority constantly. When another ogre wants to challenge for the role of tyrant, it can manifest in a few ways. It could be something like an eating contest or an outright fight to the death, the winner, of course, eating up the carcass of the loser. Now, over the course of their long lifespans, tyrants frequently take on titles. These are like surnames denoting incredible acts of war or gluttony that they've had in their lives. And while some of these names can change over time and become very numerous, the real point is to denote some aspect of that tyrant's character or abilities. So talking about the Age of Sigmar game just for a bit, this is the lore behind choosing your tyrant's big name, and it's a really great addition. It's a way to kind of boast, in a society that doesn't really respect, arrogance. You have to, back up everything you do with your ability to hunt, ability to provide, and this is the closest thing you can get to, bragging rights, I suppose. Now, alongside the Tyrant, you'll often see him surrounded by Ironguts, and this forms his Gut Guard, an elite unit of bodyguards that defend and fight alongside the Tyrant. Now keep in mind, this isn't like an honor guard where it's about honor per se, right? They aren't so proud of their tyrant that they want to defend his honor, right? He's the boss, and in battle, you do what he says. And as an added bonus, you know that the tyrant is going to fight in the thickest, which means more food and more spoils for you. So it's kind of a mutual arrangement, right? You get your biggest and best soldiers to keep you alive, and in exchange, you lead them to the best parts where the best food is, and they get to indulge. Each Irongut is handpicked by their tyrant, ogres of exceptional strength and girth and belt size that have fought for many decades. They're clad in heavy armor built from the scrap of many battles and civilizations, and they really act as the hammer of an army. Keep in mind, however, a tyrant knows that his gut guard wants him dead, right? Since these are the biggest and baddest ogres, they are kind of naturally the ones who will stand against him for leadership, right? It's sort of a keep your friends close and your enemies closer kind of thing, where now the biggest and best ogres who would challenge him for supremacy are right next to him, and he gets to know more about them than anybody else. And that might seem dumb, right, to keep the people who are going to usurp you super close, but remember, it's all about food, right? A concentration of might like this can rock an entire enemy battle line. So everyone works together in the heat of battle, and the boasting and the demonstrations of might and, the usurping and that kind of stuff, it's all saved for later. So the Tyrant and his Gut Guard represent the military might of a Warglut, but it's the Butchers, which is our next unit we're going to talk about, that dominate the spiritual aspects. You see, from an early age, an ogre is taken aside to become a butcher one day, and some say they're chosen by Gorkamorka, others say it's just this natural skill that's seen and observed, but all of them are destined for a very terrifying life. Butchers act as the shamans, the wise men and the prophets of the wargluts. They're using the remains of their prey to scry these like portents and messages from Gorkamorka. These messages are about the direction where they should head for more food and point the hunger of a god upon the realms. They are also masters of what's called gastromancy, which is the disgusting arcane power of the Ogor Mawtribes. Channeling dark blood magic mixed with the gore of their food, they can unleash these devastating spells and rites up on the battlefield, invigorating ogres with this unnatural, energy and that kind of stuff, and cursing their enemies to becoming the next meal. Now, on a practical level, they are also the cooks, right? Hence the name, they are the butchers. But in a society where everything, including religion, is about food, the one who prepares the feasts is like the holy man, right? He brings the religion about. Now, piggybacking off of that is the Slaughtermaster. And this is basically the top dog of the butchers, right? Think of him as the high prophet of a given Maw tribe. He prepares the biggest celebratory feasts, he's assisting the tyrant in the most important decision-making, and having access to the most horrifying magics within the tribe. They are just masters of their grisly craft, the most professional that an ogre can be, and the most, I guess you could say, the closest thing to a holy priest that they could possibly muster rolled into one. Now, that accounts for most of the leadership within a warglut, so let's tackle some of their units in a little bit more depth. So, like I said, not a lot of lore here per unit, but they kind of come together to form a really cool story. First up are the Gnoblars, right? When it comes to infantry, let's start at the bottom, and it doesn't get more small and basic than the Gnoblars. These are the cousins distantly related to the Gloomspite Gits, and their society has evolved in a very different way from their cousins. Originating from the realm of metal, at the very famous Scrappa Spill, the Gits that would become the Gnoblars one day were in paradise, right? They were Gits that were prone to inventing things, using scraps and raw materials to construct these crude but somewhat complex gadgets, weapons, etc., while the rest of their kind evolved to be more subterranean, like the Gloomspite Gits, right? However, these Gits, the ones who liked building things, loved being outside and doing so, searching for scrap. But there's one problem with this, we'll say, alternative lifestyle to the Gloomspite Gits, and that is Orcs. The natural big bully and the bane of the Gits. Several little Waws had taken their toll on these Gits, and they became absolutely fed up with all of these Orcs. Their solution to survive was to find someone even bigger than the Orc to mess with them. So they approached a local Maw tribe with a proposal. Don't eat us unless you're in dire need of food. In exchange, we will work for you and serve you. And thus, what we now know as the Gnoblars were born. And the ogres found this deal totally cool because they didn't care much for Gnoblar meat regardless, and this way they had like a group of servants who suited them well. Fetching things, preparing meals, pitching tents. In addition to that, the Gnoblars are also happy to fight with their new overlords and continue to build their crude inventions and use for war. So kind of like a little symbiotic relationship, which is pretty uncommon in the mortal realms. And I'll touch on one of those inventions now, and that is the scrap launcher. I figured I would just do this to keep all the Gnoblar stuff together in the same place. But this is a war machine that looks like it is constantly on the brink of collapsing into a pile of rubble. It is poorly designed, poorly crafted, and crewed by a hollering bunch of tiny little maniacs, the Gnoblars, firing projectiles of anything that isn't nailed down. They don't really have artillery pieces or anything like that, they just chuck whatever they can find. And they fire these projectiles in a way that doesn't really focus on accuracy, but littering the battlefield and enemy with dangerous scrap to frighten and scare up the enemy. And the idea here, basically, is that imagine this wall of sweaty, nasty ogres are coming at you, just hollering. It looks like just a wall of beef. At the same time, you have to keep your head low and shield your basically your top half, because all these shards of metal and rock are hailing you from the sky. So it's like a 1-2 punch kind of thing. You just feel like there's no escape. And so with the little guys out of the way, let's talk about the basic ogres again, right? The Gluttons are the most basic unit of the warglut. They are fat, sweaty, perpetually hungry. The Gluttons charge into battle. They wield whatever blunt object or hunk of scrap they can find, and the sheer force behind their swings is enough to turn just about anything into a weapon. And this is in addition to their mouths, because mid-battle, they'll pick up and take a bite out of anything they are fighting, which is disgusting and terrifying. To think that a free guild soldier makes a great mid-battle snack. And honestly, that's really it for this unit, right? They're kind of the blueprint for all ogre kind, and that's stuff we've all covered at the beginning of this series, where when we talk about ogres, like, this is really just like the most basic of the basic. This is how they conduct themselves, and anything from this is kind of like an ogre glutton plus blank. Because everything we talked about before really embodies them, right? They're fat, they're mean, every part of their worldview, like their religion and government, is shaped by the needs and the pursuit of food. Now, next up are the Leadbelchers, sort of like a natural evolution of the ogre glutton, but the devastating power of ogres doesn't end with clubs and scrap. The Leadbelchers are a terrifying ranged element of this faction. See, ogres love loud noises and the deep rumble of cannons, but they only loosely know how to construct them. Instead, after the Mawtribe hears the roar of cannons from far away, they'll actually head straight for that battle. And no matter how that fight's going, they're going to attack the defenders, steal the cannons as spoil. So, like, eventually, picture a free guild fort, right? Just getting rocked by a Mawtribe. And while a lot of ogres are going to eat the remnants and survivors, some run up to the walls and rip off the cannons. Then, the Gnoblars are set to the task of finding out how to make gunpowder. Again, their craftiness comes in super handy for this little symbiotic relationship they got. The Leadbelchers, as they're called now, with these big cannons, carry these artillery pieces deep into combat, fueled by the joy and sound of the fury of the cannons. And here's the thing, if cannonballs are not available, they'll use anything around. Rocks, scrap, wood, anything they can jam inside the barrel will get fired upon the enemy. And it's this kind of like quote-unquote weapon crafting that leaves the Ironweld Arsenal artisans just absolutely horrified at what's going on. Now, one step up from the Leadbelchers in terms of how big the cannon is, basically, is the Ironblaster. This is another crude cannon, but its origins are not as clear. Right, it appears as a massive cannon being carried on a crude trailer, which is like their artillery piece, but there are competing stories as to the origins of the war machines, but there's a few things that all ogres agree upon. There was once a race called the Sky Titans, deep in Ghyran over the place called the Sabers Sprawl. At some point, the Sky Titans fell. Now, there's different accounts by whether Gorkamorka tore it down or there was some other threat, and these cannons were looted from the crater of the Sky Titans. Likely, my understanding of this, there was a civilization fortified on one of the many floating islands in Ghyran, or it could be like there were cities in Akshi that had found a way to fly, basically, pre-Carriage and Overlords, and something happened, probably during the Age of Myth, started the Age of Chaos, and it collapsed, leaving colossal weapons of war strewn everywhere. Regardless of how mythical their origins may be or not, the ogres believe them to be like the weapons of the gods. And while these artillery pieces have dispersed among various Mawtribes, tyrants will pay top dollar to have one in their arsenal. The idea being one shot can tear down a fortress wall or shred an entire enemy flank. And that brings us to the last section of units here, simply called Camp Followers. These are like strange ogres that don't really fit into the greater structure of a Mawtribe or a Warglut, but stick with them and fight with them as allies and friends. Starting off with Firebellies. This is one of the more fun entries in the book here, and I absolutely love these. So they don't belong to any specific Mawtribe, but instead, they have their own like priesthood. They see Gorkamorka as the Sun Eater, sort of an evolution of the Mawtribe's religion, and their legend passed down through an oral tradition from one Firebelly to another. Basically, the idea is that Gorkamorka at some point tried to eat the sun itself, and as he chewed on it, the searing heat filled his body until he belched out an unimaginable torrent of flame, which then created Akshi, the realm of fire. The idea that this entire realm was made by the burp of Gorkamorka, right? I love those fantastic stories regarding their god. And in their attempts to kind of emulate Gorkamorka in this way, firebellies will ingest incredibly volatile materials and ingredients and bellow out gouts of fire as they burp upon their foes. They are wizards in their own right, capable of channeling the arcane through dangerous and disgusting diets as well. Now, to become a firebelly, you need to first encounter one and kind of become his student. They will go through a series of trials to enter the priesthood, and this includes things like eating fire crystals from Akshi, their hair is all burned away, they cover themselves in tattoos, and for their final trial they must hunt, kill, and eat a magma droth, which obviously puts them at odds with the fire slayers. And like I said, they don't really belong to any Maw tribe, they are always welcome, right? Ogres all around the realms love to have a firebelly with them, for they are unique in another way, and that is that they have mastered the art of seasoning. They can sprinkle bits of magma droth scales or fire root onto a meal and make it taste amazing. Again, in a society all about food, the guys who know how to use spices reign supreme. Next up are the Maneaters. This is a fun one because there's a lot of models for this. I'm just going to pick one and throw it on the screen, but as I mentioned earlier this week, that has really been driven home in this book is the ogre's ability to work with other races, and no other unit demonstrates this better than the Maneaters. For these younger and brash ogres of any Maw tribe, the taste of adventure and mercenary work is hard to pass up. The term Maneater comes from the Age of Chaos, when the god king Sigmar turned his back on the realms and chaos was ascendant. In the madness, the Maw tribes saw that Gorkamorka, his dealings with Sigmar had collapsed, and it was open season to eat humans again without his wrath. The ogres developed a grisly reputation as Maneaters, a name that the mercenary-minded of their kind still carry to inspire a sense of fear in whoever they deal with. These are ogres that wander the realms in search of food and adventure, wielding a super wide array of weapons. If you guys go look at the models, there's like 6 different Maneater models, if not more. And while they also do not cling to a specific Maw tribe, they are always welcome in every single one of them because of their battle expertise, and mainly because the ogres love to hear a good story. While everyone's eating at night, the Maneaters will tell them tales of all the different crazy places they've been and the adventures they've been on by hiring themselves out as mercenaries, and go into detail about the wandering life of a sellsword in rich narrative detail. And the last unit entry for today are the Gorgers. And this is an interesting one because I had no knowledge of these whatsoever. But there exists a curse among the ogres known as the Empty Belly Curse, an affliction they view as punishment by their god. And it does kind of what it sounds like. An ogre afflicted with this will eat but never be satisfied. Not in the sense that they're always being hungry, but there's no joy in consuming anything. It all tastes like ash in their mouths, even the choicest cuts of meat. No matter how much they eat, they keep losing weight, becoming these gaunt figures, which is like the polar opposite of everything else in the Omri, desperately trying to consume everything to satiate their maddening hunger. So tyrants keep these afflicted ogres, known as Gorgers, once they reach kind of the full diseased status, outside of the camp. They sit in cages, then they cry and they whimper and they pine for anything to eat. And while they are cursed in the eyes of the tribe, want nothing to do with them, they're still useful. Because what happens is when a battle comes about, they're going to unleash the Gorger upon the enemy to cause as much damage as possible before falling in combat. Because his going nuts and killing things and then trying to eat stuff, and ultimately putting all the focus on the Gorger, just means that the bodies are easier to clean up afterwards for dinner by the actual war glut. They are feral, robbed of reason by hunger, and are discarded just as such. So why is all of this cool, right? First of all, just having lore at last is just awesome. There's just something awesome about having, your favorite units in the story being cool. I love the Leadbelchers. I have to say the Firebellies are my favorite. I had no expectation of that, but the idea of this priesthood within a very nomadic culture, I thought was really neat to have their own origin story for Gorkamorka and magics they use. Thought it was really, really cool. In addition to that, the idea of the Gorgers really kind of stuck out to me because it almost reminded me of the flayed ones from Necrons in 40k, where you have this subset of your culture that has a disease that is very hyper specific to your, race. But you can't just destroy them, right? You want to keep them off to the side, but also they're useful. So you integrate them in different ways into your society. And I kind of like that. There's a really cool thing there. And this idea that, like, what's the worst thing imaginable to a society built on food is that food not being enjoyable anymore. Like, that is, it breaks you. And I think that's a really interesting, play on disease. Welcome, wargamers, to the spooky underworld of Shyish as we travel alongside the Winterbite Mawtribe in search of plunder, glory, but most of all, the next meal. And today's story was requested by patron Nick R, who wanted to chat about ogres. He's like, oh, there's just not enough lore about ogres. Here's for you, buddy. Thank you all so much to my patrons. You make my day every day. Furious at the Winterbite Mawtribe's incursion into the lands of Athanasia, which he claims as his domain alone, the death god Nagash unleashes the sorrowful host upon the Beastclaw Raiders. This innumerable Nighthaunt army sweeps down upon the Winterbite, who fall back before the spectral assault, retreating into the mists of the Everwinter. Masses of spirit hosts and chainghast follow in pursuit, but such is the supernatural cold of the cursed blizzard that even their ethereal bodies begin to freeze, crystallizing into semi-solid matter. The ogres rush to counterattack, with Icebrow hunters leading in loping packs of Yetis into the fray and smashing their would-be assailants into shards of ice. The Freya crunch their brittle foes between their teeth, and the great necromancer learns a disturbing truth. Even the spectral dead are not immune to the eternal hunger of the Everwinter. One of the longer stories we've covered from Battletome timelines, and frankly one of the more detailed, and so we'll start by setting the scene, talking about the forces involved, and of course exploring at the end here how we can play this out on the tabletop. So the story is set in a region known as Athanasia, which is Greek for eternal life or deathlessness, which makes it funny, seeing as though it's located in the prime inner lands of Shyish, not too far from the Nadir, which is a black hole of death magic that nothing can escape from. This is actually the first location I've covered in these videos that can be found in the maps of the core book. If you turn to the Shyish Realms section in the core book, Athanasia refers to a large territory rather than a specific point. You can actually see it if you open the book, it's up towards the top left. It's kind of this huge space within the continent, but it's not like a specific point like, say, a city would be. And there are a few notable things about that region that we do get from this map, and a few others that we've kind of pieced together. So for example, it's the home of the Ulrung Lodge of Fireslayers, who followed a trail of Urgold deep into Shyish. This was pointed out in the Malign Portent's short story, All Turns to Ash, which I will link down below. There's also an Order Serpentis fortification tower known as Nar Kavas from the cities of Sigmar, though we don't have a lot of info on that one. We kind of just know that it exists. But this gives us a realm, of course Shyish, and a region within it. And we can look at that map that's in the core book and see that it's sort of a peninsula that's dominated by a mountain range that goes straight through it. And so we can use these later to come up with suitable rules for the battlefield and terrain and all that kind of stuff. And it makes complete sense that Nagash claims this land as his own. It's in Shyish. It's in the prime innerlands, which is where it's just where he is, right? Of course, it's really close to Nadir, a massive well of death energy, and that gives us a great location and motivation for this battle. I love it when all these things come together. And so now let's dive into the forces involved, and I'll start honestly with the Nighthaunt because there's not a lot of info here. The Sorrowful Host sounds really familiar, but I could not for the life of me find anything about it. If you know something about the Sorrowful Host, you've seen them referenced somewhere, please leave it in the comments below and I will pin it. All we know for sure is that this army consisted of a boatload of Nighthaunt, and we'll talk more a bit about what that could mean during army construction, but based on text alone, we simply don't know much. But moving on to the Mawtribes force, we can talk about several things actually, because this is specifically the Winterbite tribe, and it's actually one of my favorites of the Mawtribes. If I was going to play Mawtribes, I would play Winterbite, no question. Among the different Beastclaw Raider groups, ogres of the Winterbite are known as the Freya. You've heard that used in the story up above, and that term translates loosely to unseen hunter, and you'll figure out why here in just a hot second. The truth is, we don't know as much about the Winterbite as we do about other Mawtribes. They are fairly small as a tribe, they prefer isolation, and there's overall a kind of air of mystery about them. But more than anything, their defining feature or trait is their relationship with the Everwinter. Now, if you aren't familiar, tribes of Beasts of Chaos are perpetually followed by a supernatural storm. There's no consensus on its origin, but it seems to be a curse that moves with these tribes. There's so much that hasn't been explained about the Everwinter, but one very important thing is that most ogres, and pretty much everyone else, all agree it's a bad thing. Except for the Winterbite. For them, it's become a deep part of their lifestyle and their mythos. They have a connection with this storm that no other Beastclaw Raider tribe does. See, for one thing, they stay closer to the heart of the storm than any other Mawtribe, which substantially raises the risk of the Everwinter enveloping them and killing them. But it also allows these ogres to use the storm as a weapon against their enemies. So picture this, right? It's mid-August, summertime, things are good, then a massive whiteout blizzard sweeps in. Now, the Winterbite don't have a lot of mounts, the Thundertusks, Stonehorns, and so on, but they have another trick, or several more, I guess I should add. Icefall Yetis are corralled by hunters to lash out upon the enemy, kind of acting as harassing units that can strike fast and retreat back into the icy winds. It gives the creatures sort of a natural camouflage, and this extends to the rest of the tribe as well. They all wear white pelts to conceal themselves within the storm. And these are not like walk up and punch you in the face kind of ogres, they're sneaky, which makes them so dangerous. They only fight on their terms, using camouflage, ambush, sneak attacks, and so on. To them, the Everwinter is the source of life and a blessing from Gorkamorka. It ensnares their prey and shrouds them in secrecy. So if you're getting attacked by them, all you see is white, right? There's snow, there's wind, they blend right in, so oftentimes you'll hear guns and bows firing off at nothing, because even though everything is white, this cacophony of motion between wind and snowdrifts and yetis and ogres and white pelts, it's all completely meant to be disorienting. And when the prey is at its end, the ogres descend and wipe them out, taking big bites of flesh that's like frozen rock solid. The tribe then moves on, leaving a frozen graveyard in their wake. I really like the Winterbite, if you couldn't tell, and I see this story as the perfect example of them in action. Like when you read in the lore that this is how they fight, you're like, okay, so they're the sneaky ones. But then when you actually see a story that uses and puts those abilities in context, I like it. I like it a lot. So this faction rolls up to Athanasia, didn't do anything wrong except for, trespassing on Nagash's lawn, and they are immediately confronted with a huge Night Haunt army. So what's their first response? Fall back. Which are two words you never really hear like in a destruction army outside of Grots when they're like morale breaks, but this is exactly what I meant earlier by using the Everwinter. The Winterbite always want to be fighting on their terms, and so the Everwinter turning all areas that it goes to into the same frozen hellscape allow them to do that, right? Once you get used to a life in the tundra, you have an immediate advantage over anyone who doesn't. So, like I said, they fall back, and waves of spirit hosts and chain ghast follow closely, only to start freezing. Now, at first, the story kind of lost me for a hot second when I was thinking about this. It doesn't make any sense. How do you freeze a phantom? But we're talking about being near the heart of a truly supernatural storm, and I think the emphasis in this specific story is on the supernatural aspect, whereas in a lot of the stories about Beastclaw Raiders, it's more the storm, right? It's just kind of a background thing. It's the setting they're always in, but this is a real emphasis on no, this is not like a hurricane storm that's just following people. There's something different about it. And now that I've seen this story, I want more like it. I want you to teach me about the Everwinter by showing me what it does to various races and locations. Being able to freeze ghosts, to me, really highlights the arcane nature of it all. more so than we get in the actual blurb about the Everwinter. So whatever the Everwinter is, it is a basic storm that makes things cold, yes, but it's also a vortex of intense magic power, as if they were pulling their own reservoir of power with them wherever they went. And like I described earlier, the Winterbite default to be the Freya, unseen hunters. Yetis and hunters sweep in and take advantage of the storm's effect upon their ethereal enemy. Soon after that, the rest of the tribe pounces in. And Nagash, along with us, the reader, learn a huge lesson about the Everwinter. And so that is the story, right? Let's talk a little bit more about the combatants here. Of course, I'll explore more on the Nighthaunt when I get to a story from their book, but let's talk about bringing these events to the table, right? The two factions involved, and we'll kind of have some loose guidelines to build some forces. We'll start with the Nighthaunt since it's way faster. The short answer is do whatever you want, just avoid named characters. I mean, that's pretty much all I got. No characters are mentioned here. If you do have to take one, like, just because of the collection that you own, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. It's not a hard, fast rule. None of these things are. But, just understand that this is a force that I couldn't find tied to anything, so they could be anonymous. They could have been wiped out in the story. We wouldn't know. Now, I assumed, reading this, that this is an Allegiance Nighthaunt army, but of course it doesn't have to be. You could go Legions of Nagash, seeing as how Nagash himself, the god of undeath, literally directed them. Like in this exact scenario, it is a Legion of Nagash. It is literally him sending out troops specifically. And the only units mentioned are Chain Rasps and Spirit Hosts. And they do fit into a Legions of Nagash army. And so, of course, there's that. There's Grand Alliance Death, but there's not a whole lot going on there. For me personally, just based on the things that I've seen and kind of like the important parts of the story where the lesson learned by Nagash was that ethereal stuff freezes, I'm probably going to lean towards Nighthaunt when it comes to army building. But of course, like I said, you can do whatever you want. In stark contrast, though, we can say a few things about list building for the Mawtribes army that was depicted. Obviously, run them as Winterbite. It is a sub-faction that they're talking about, a very specific one. They have an emphasis on Yetis and Hunters in their rules, but also in the story. Again, those are like the only named units that we have in terms of like specific units that you can play that were pointed out. It's fluffy, it gives some real bonuses. But understand, because the Yetis and the Hunters are named, it doesn't mean that you have to have a complete army of them. Do what sounds fun, right? And while they have fewer big beasts, so like Stonehorns and Thundertusks and all that stuff, they still do have some. So don't think it's lore-breaking to take them. And all these major Mawtribes have a mix of Gutbusters and Beastclaw Raiders, but some things to consider while you're army building. Why are they in Shyish? You have total freedom to create a motivation, because if they're heading to something specific, they would probably take certain units to achieve that goal. So kind of keep that in mind. Did they know about a certain food thing that they're headed towards? They would need, the right kind of troops to crack open whatever defenses were to get the food inside. So just kind of think about that, build a little backstory for your Mawtribes army, and that'll kind of direct what you need to achieve that objective in Shyish. So now let's talk about gameplay, right? This game is going to go down in Shyish, as it does in the story. I suggest making the table sort of mountainous if you have access to the terrain for it. Again, all we know about the physical place is that it's in Shyish. It's a peninsula with a mountain range. Of course, it'll be totally covered in snow if you have a snow mat or whatever, but it doesn't really matter rules-wise. What about the battle plan? Well, There's two points of contact in this story, which is kind of unusual for the stories we've covered so far. There's the initial charge of the Nighthaunt, where the Beastclaw Raiders fall back, and then there's the big fight near the heart of the Everwinter, when the Winterbite fight back on their terms. To me, the more interesting thing is the latter. It's where kind of the weight of the story is, and where a couple of ogres teach the god of death a valuable lesson. Bring a jacket, I don't care if you're ghosts. So to me, we're looking for a battle plan with an attacker, defender type thing, and at that moment specifically in the story, the Nighthaunt are flying blind and acting as sort of the defender, where the Winterbite are now the attacker and they have a home field advantage within the storm. So let's look for something like that. I couldn't find a mission that really captures me. Again, my default is always to go find a already created battle plan so that everyone can reference it equally and there's no debate about stuff. I couldn't find that, so I went to the open war generator and I came up with this deployment style where you have player B, which would be the Nighthaunt player, running headlong into the Everwinter, chasing after the ogres, and the ogres, being player A, are all around them. Now they're ready to pounce upon their prey. For the objective of the mission, I chose Secure a Foothold. All terrain features count as objectives. Players score 1 victory point for each terrain feature they control at the end of the 5th battle round. Buildings that can be garrisoned, which you can choose to do or not, it's totally up to you, are worth 2 victory points instead of 1 if the controlling unit is garrisoning the building. The player with the most victory points wins a major victory. Now, the reason I chose this one is because really, it's hard to kind of just not do, kill or be killed missions. And I want a little bit more variety in my missions with some different goals, because Nighthaunt, they don't have like the sheer killiness to go and just wipe out an army. You know what I mean? They have a lot of cool tools at their disposal, but a lot of them have more to do with like board presence and control and that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to have something where they are the defenders, but they're in a really good position to use their strengths to push back the ogres here. And again, it makes sense that terrain is kind of the thing you're fighting over, because the entire instigating thing of this whole fight is that Nagash wants them off his property. So having the land be important within the gameplay, I think makes sense, but I'm open to other ideas. If you wanted to represent something like Nagash raising the army of the dead pretty much like right there on the spot, you could do something like Catch Them Off Guard, which is a ruse that I use quite a bit on these kinds of things, which is after setup is complete, you can immediately move any of your units up to d6 inches, roll separately for each unit. So that would be something I would probably give to the Nighthaunt player, or you could flip it and give it to the ogre player if you want to simulate them having like their big pounce, the big strike moment. Or of course you can simulate the Nighthaunt just pouring endlessly in. That's one that can go both ways, totally up to you and your opponent. And so as we come to the end of this video, again, those are just a few basic thoughts to get you thinking about this. It's an interesting story. Like I said, there's 2 points of contact, so you could have a 2-game campaign where there's the initial assault of the Nighthaunt attacking, and it's like a fallback mission of the BCR trying to run away. Or you could again do the main event, which is the ogres pouncing upon the unsuspecting Nighthaunt, who have no idea what they're getting into. Both are awesome, both are thematic. I would love to know more about them. So go ahead in the comments down below, tell me how you would recreate this kind of thing on the tabletop. The last little bit here is the Winterbite bonus abilities, their allegiance abilities, are super thematic. There's not a ton of shooting in Nighthaunt, so it doesn't help them. If you don't know, basically, when they're in their deployment zone, they get a bonus to survival against shooting, essentially, because the idea is that they're hiding in the winter storm, which is really cool, and it's perfectly thematic for what we're trying to do. It's just that it's just a rule that doesn't do a whole lot in this very specific matchup, which I think is funny. But if it was like, Skaven instead of Nighthaunt, we'd be cooking with fire, all of a sudden things go up. So that's kind of important to remember. But any other rules that you want to add to make this terrain difficult for one faction, I guess it really wouldn't be difficult for Nighthaunt though, because they can fly and the Winterbite are used to traveling in this kind of stuff. So actually scratch that. If you had something that really represented wind or visibility, that kind of stuff, those things would affect both factions. So anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Again, thank you, my patrons over on Patreon, for their suggestions and content, and also, of course, their undying support. My goodness, you guys, it's changing my life, and I'm so excited for the future. Thank you all again, and happy wargaming. Welcome, wargamers, to the hangry and dangerous mortal realms as we adjust our bibs just a bit and get a bite out of the latest Mawtribes battle tome, with a story that I found particularly interesting, and it is known as The Fall of the Dawnhold. The elven refuge of the Dawnhold stands among the Ember Mountains of Akshi, a shining beacon of hope amidst the darkness of the Age of Chaos. The fortress sanctuary rebuffs all attempts by the armies of Chaos Lord Slathanex to breach its walls. Sword masters guard the ramparts, and her fire-hurling lore masters obliterate any machine sent forth. Frustrated, Slathenix digs in for a lengthy and costly siege. But fortune is on his side. Tyrant Clug the Flatulent of the Meatfist Mawtribe has long sought to feast upon tasty elven flesh. He offers to bring his great Ironblaster cannons to bear upon the stronghold, if the Chaos Lord agrees that everything living inside the Dawnhold belongs to the ogres, and is theirs alone to devour. After 10 days of ceaseless bombardment, Clug's rusted, oversized cannons shatter the outer wall of the Dawnhold, and the allied forces of ogres and chaos warriors rush in to butcher the occupants. However, during the carnage that follows, Slathenix's mana core feasts upon a single elf. Furious, Clug the Flatulent accuses the Chaos Lord of breaking the terms of their treaty. His ogre gluttons immediately turn upon their allies, hacking them to death with enormous cleavers. Alright friends, so let's break this story down just a bit. We know actually where it takes place in Akshi, the Realm of Fire, but I couldn't actually find the Ember Mountains from the core book. Maybe it's a mountain range that was lost or destroyed during something, but I couldn't find the exact location, assuming it's, in the Great Parch. But then again, the map for Akshi is a very busy one, so I might have just missed it. Now, it is important to note that this does happen during the Age of Chaos, where civilizations and forts and bastions everywhere were under siege from all different kinds of forces, mainly of course chaos. And I missed the time period when I first read this and was like, where did this city come from? But yeah, this was just one more example of how the Age of Chaos ruined everything that was there. All we know about the defenders in this story is that they're a bunch of elves in the Realm of Fire, just trying to be chill and wait out the Age of Chaos, and in walks trouble, Chaos Lord Slathenix. Now, we don't have any real idea what kind of Chaos army this is, and therefore what kind of troops it's made of, but I do find a few things interesting. They wanted this fortification destroyed, but they didn't really care about the people inside of it, as when they made the deal with the Mawtribes we'll talk about later. But they were not, in my opinion, a siege warfare warband or army, and I have trouble reconciling that. Like, we're gonna go conquer every castle in the land. How? I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there. It says he brought some war machines and they were struck down, but I feel like if you were gearing up to go siege hunting, maybe you would have a little bit of a better plan or idea how to use those, war machines. But I just like the idea, very inspiring. He leads a chaos warband to conquest, I plan a road trip. Yeah, where are we staying? I don't know. We'll figure it out when I'm tired. It's not the most, inspiring presence for a leader. But due to a lack of foresight, or maybe just not being good at siege warfare, he put his war machines up front apparently, they settle in for a long siege. Which I cannot imagine a worse idea for a Chaos army. As we discussed in the lore videos for Slaves to Darkness, a Chaos Lord needs to be constantly asserting their authority, constantly directing the ambition and energy of everyone below him. And you know what's not fun? Sitting and waiting for elves to starve. So this just up front sounds like a terrible recipe for disaster. So what's a way to bring a wacky buffer in to shake up this paradigm? A portion of the Meatfist Mawtribe appears, led by an ogre with the single greatest name in Warhammer history, Clug the Flatulent. Interesting to me that these are Meatfist and not Underguts, who have a much deeper affinity for explosives and cannons and stuff, but of course, every sub-faction will have every unit at their disposal. It just kind of struck me as a story that would fit them a little bit more, but regardless, these boys came looking for a snack, and they found it. Now, I have a question here towards the end of our opening segment here, and that's just to ask, if this deal didn't fall apart in bloodshed, a mana core scooped up one dead elf, how was this going to end, right? Was the Chaos Lord going to see the walls breached, the ogres take and eat everything and everyone inside, and then just let them walk away? I think that would be such an act of cowardice that he would get murdered by all of his lieutenants. Is the goal really just to destroy the fort by any means, and there's no plundering, we don't need slaves, we don't, you know what I mean? It's just to destroy fortifications, but if that's true, why aren't they better with siege equipment? It just, in my mind, they were always going to turn on the ogres, right? These guys in the Chaos Army had been sitting and chilling for so long, they want action. But we will use the guns that the ogres brought first. So in my mind, my little headcanon I have going on, the Chaos armies were always going to fight with the ogres. However, I don't think that the Slathanex, the Chaos Lord, anticipated his Manticore eating somebody and turning the ogres onto them so soon. I imagine they would attack as the ogres were eating and probably not paying attention, but as is, they kicked the hornet's nest mid-battle, which ultimately sealed their fate. And again, we don't know exactly what kind of Chaos army this was, how confident they might feel, if they had time to, plan, a surprise attack or something like that on the ogres, kind of surrounding them. I like to think it's a Slaves to Darkness warband where it has all different kinds of things mixed in, but I'm not quite sure. Again, it could have been anything, because he definitely has elements within his name that could go be attributed to Slaanesh or something like that, just with the Slathanex, and then possibly even Nurgle. There's a lot of ways it can go, but I just think that the unit formation, it could have been playing in his head, okay, we'll break open the fort, let all the ogres rush in, and now we have all the ogres pinned in one place, and we'll be able to fight them and exterminate them now that the doors are opened. I'm sure that was the idea. How that panned out doesn't seem that great, but I think it's a wonderful story to illustrate the fact that, Chaos armies need to keep moving. They need a direction, and I don't see any other way that this ends other than with Slathanex totally dead, either by ogres, elves, or his own lieutenants who had to sit there for weeks watching this siege happen. It's an awesome story that brings together a few different factions that have nothing in common with one another. Okay, friends, so why is this story so cool? For me personally, I love when Grand Alliances work together. It makes the realms feel like an ecosystem, right? Not everyone is immediately hostile. We have factions that have to work together. They all have different temperaments. Sometimes they don't want to attack one another, and so we'll let these grots or whatever just kind of have the forest, just as long as they don't come out too far from it. That's fine. I like that kind of thing because it just paints a picture of a world that's brimming with life, but they all have to work together. And also, can you imagine being one of the elves on that wall, right? You see a Chaos army, and no matter what deity they serve, right, they're going to have things like mutations, maybe a war shrine, they could have knights, all the works. Again, we kind of think this is meant to be a siege force of some kind, and yeah, you're picking out their siege weapons, and you're doing great, but ultimately, they're settling in for a long-form siege. And then you see Mawtribes coming around the corner, and your heart becomes a knot, because the best-case scenario is that they come and kill all the Chaos dudes, and now we have to fight ogres. Hopefully, a bunch of the ogres get killed before they come and fight the gates. But that horror and, that sinking feeling in your gut when you see, an ogre and a Chaos Lord fist bump each other and laugh. I could just see myself instantly becoming Bill Paxton's character from Alien and just being game over, man. Game over. Get me out of here, man. And regardless of the outcome of that, discussion, I want to talk more about places like this. I want to know about them, bastions of order that aren't big mega cities, right? It's called a fortress sanctuary full of elves in Akshi, and I'm so interested in that place. Was it a place of worship? If so, to who? Is it a sanctuary in the sense of it's a safe place for travelers and merchants rather than being a religious sanctuary type thing? I don't know, but I really want to, and I would love to see Games Workshop put out I don't know, I guess when I was thinking originally of the Cities of Sigmar book, it wouldn't be framed around specific cities, but rather types of cities. So outpost, fortification, mega city, that kind of thing, where they have different resources and tools available based on how big or advanced they are. I would love to see that, because that would unlock a lot of room for us to create our own cities, dot them across the realms, and just really breathe a lot of life into them. And so it's stuff like this that I'm I want to know about this. Why was this fortress, sanctuary, or monastery, or whatever, why is this here? Why is it predominantly elves in the middle of a realm of fire? I don't know, but I really want to. It's these little locations that go a long way to adding a bit of life to the realms, right? It's not just infinite space connected by mega cities or, set pieces for big battles. Obviously, they were well defended. So how well do pockets of resistance like this hold out? Show me what, as Vindicarum or Excelsius, as those cities expand and kind of seed new locations and cities and townships across the realms, what do they look like? How do they keep themselves safe? I want to know those kinds of things. But honestly, like wrapping it up here at the end, the truth is this story is awesome because it makes me want to know more about all of them. Like, to me, this is the highest compliment that I can give one of these short stories in a battle tome. I want to know about the defenders, all about the elves and the buildings there. I want to know about the Chaos Warband, who doesn't seem to know anything about how to siege warfare stuff and doesn't seem to want really much from inside. And the ogres, who were just hungry for a meal. Each of them is a perfect snapshot of their faction, and it makes me want to learn more about them. To me, these are the best kinds of these short stories, and why I started doing these kind of like, pulling out blurb stories and really expanding upon them is because it makes me want to engage with every faction that's represented here. Welcome, Wargamers, to the dank caves of Ulgu, because today we are talking about some very special little thick boys straight out of the Ogor Mawtribes book, and I've been so excited to talk about this because I was actually waiting to cover this lore topic specifically until I got the new 3rd edition tome. Because today we are talking about the Underguts Mawtribe, and this was requested by Rusted Branch. I believe it was in the comments of our Blister Skin exploration. And if you would like your question answered, go ahead and leave it in the comments down below, and please give this video a like. And so in this video, we're going to explore what the Ogor Mawtribes are, what makes then the Underguts, a sub-faction within Ogor Mawtribes, what makes them unique based on their environment, their peculiarities that might exist. We'll go through an exemplary battle as well as take any other bits of lore that are in the battle tome, and then just finish up the video answering the question, why is this cool? Why is this compelling? How does it fit into the greater story? What themes are at play? Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar, or maybe just Games Workshop kind of fantasy archetypes, who are the ogres? More specifically, the Ogor Mawtribes is the full name of the faction that is playable in Age of Sigmar. Who are they? Well, these are the giant humanoids that kind of just roam around in their various cult Mawtribes. It's sort of their term for warband or city structure. And really, their whole world is built upon a single idea. I'm really hangry. Their hunger is legendary. They just eat and consume. They are these giant titanic locusts in a sense. And they're not super picky about what or who they eat, except they don't tend to like eating each other. And like a handful of other creatures that are just a bit too gamey for them. And when I say that they're hungry, what I mean is that idea of just constant needing to feed has entirely shaped their worldview, their religious structure, their hierarchy. Tyrants are chosen, meaning the warlord of the warband is chosen by how much they can provide for the tribe to be able to eat off of, which is a really cool test of skill. And so when I say that they're hungry, it's not just like a meme level thing of like, oh, they're always chomping, like Theodore from the Chipmunks. But that hunger and the desire to devour things is a fundamental part of their society, their worldview, their currencies, everything. Now, like all destruction factions, they have some deep reflection in Gorkamorka. That is the god of destruction. And even though Gorkamorka is mostly represented as a twin-headed orc that can split into 2 orcs and then come back to 1, they revere Gorkamorka in a way of seeing him as what's called the Gulping God. In their mythology, Gorkamorka, even though he looks like he has green skin in a lot of stories, is depicted in numerous ways. And in many of those, it's not really about what he physically looks like, but it's the deeds he does that resonate with the Mawtribes. Drinking entire oceans, eating entire stampedes of cattle in one gulp, like that kind of stuff. And while they all have exhibited like similar behaviors, like they'll have a fort in the center of a region and then start kind of going on these hunting trips that are concentric rings going bigger and bigger, basically just looking for food, and when they fully exhaust the area, they'll go to a different place, kind of a thing. So there's like similarities between tribes that they seem to exhibit similar behaviors, but as we know, as different species go to different realms, like the realm of fire, the realm of, in this case, shadow, Ulgu, those realms always have an effect on the inhabitants within them. It begins to change little bits of your nature. If you're in the realm of fire, you're a little more impetuous, hot-headed. Well, if you're in the realm of shadow, it's about illusory magics, deception, guile. And so today's question, as we move from talking about Ogor Mawtribes in general to the Underguts specifically, what does that kind of magic do to a titanic eating machine just trying to go on about their lives? And we're going to start that with an exemplary battle. Like so many other powerful empires, the Dwarden underlords of Kazakh Fulgar are driven underground by the coming of the Dark God's legions. In their hidden cavern gun forts, they think themselves safe. But they do not anticipate the ferocity of another enemy, the Underguts. In a long and bloody war, the ogres sack the Dwarden's gun forts. During the fighting, the ogres learn to use the Underlord's greatest weapon against them. The Mawtribe has always made use of vast numbers of Gnoblars, and these diminutive tinkerers manage to create crude, unrefined blast powder by copying the Dwarden's methods. This volatile, deadly substance proves fascinating to the Underguts, who delight in the cacophonous explosions it causes and the taste of the charred, splattered flesh it leaves in its wake. The Underlords are devoured as the ogres blast great holes in their fortification and sweep in to overwhelm the day's defenders. The Underguts claim Kazakh Fulgar as their Gluthold, renaming it Mount Bellow for the thunderous explosions that rumble through its cavernous depths. Thrilled by their conquest, if now a bit deafened, the Mawtribe's warriors daub the image of the mountain Pradley upon gutplate and flesh alike. All through the Age of Chaos, the Underguts journey along an ever-expanding maw path. Unlike the majority of their fellow Mawtribes, the ogres do not travel by land, but instead burrow their way through the bowels of the realms using cannon fire and explosive barrels, chewing their way through piles of rock and debris left behind. More than once, such crude demolition work causes a rockfall that squashes hundreds of Gnoblars, yet overall this unexpectedly straightforward tactic makes hunting the pallid abominations that are the ogre's prime food source far easier. That story was Explosive Evolution, straight out of the 3.0 Battle Tome from their timeline section. And let's kind of break that down a little bit. So we got this first glimpse of the Underguts and how they kind of come into a situation. There's a whole bunch of dwarves thinking, Age of Chaos, not gonna bother us. Why? Because we got cannons pointed at these cannons, and no one's gonna touch our cannons because we're underground. Brilliant. But, the mortal realms being as dangerous as they are, it's always the enemy they don't anticipate that ends up being the one that destroys them, and of course, who is looking underground for a giant tribe of ogres? Now, one thing here is interesting to me is that they're called the Underguts beforehand, but this seems to be the seminal battle where the Gnoblars learn to make gunpowder. So are they just random cave dwelling and they had to claw and very slowly move? Totally possible. I'm just kind of curious as to what they rocked up to this battle with, if it was during this long battle that they kind of became what we know them as. And so let's talk about these Gnoblars reverse engineering, quote-unquote, gunpowder. This is an immediate advantage that they have that, destruction armies just generally don't. For a lot of these, they have to ransack, the goods of other forces of order to get gunpowder. It's a very precious resource within their society. And to say that the Gnoblars learned it, I think, is sort of a wink in the wrong direction of, I don't think they learned how to make gunpowder. I think they learned how to do a step-by-step process, but have no clue what they're actually doing. They're just I saw the stunty guy put this chemical in, and then he added a little bit of this, and they don't know the proportion. So it's all this, it's terrible gunpowder. But as long as it goes boom, and it makes the big ogres happy, it is a successful batch. But I love the mad scientist idea of you don't know what any of this crap is, but you're just mixing stuff into vials and it's turning colors, and all of a sudden, bada bing, bada boom, we got gunpowder for days. And this is what really makes their way of life, I think, more meaningfully possible, is just the ability to go out underground. It's Ulgu's Realm of Shadow, so I expect there to be a lot of caverns and stalactite and stalagmite, kind of openings within the earth that they can travel through. I don't think they're necessarily blasting every single square inch, because that's super hard. Seattle's been at it for quite a while. But I like the origin story quite a bit. Now, what's interesting though is that I went over to the Underguts page here in the 3.0 Battle Tome, and it just doesn't give me the same vibe. The story that we got was them kind of coming out and being very oh, this is awesome, things are blowing up, and everyone's kind of going deaf. It just sounds like they're having a great time at a metal concert / dark cave fireworks show. They're having a blast, pun intended. But then when you go to their actual lore section, I think this really highlights less so what they're like in battle, but more what they're like day to day when you first encounter them, because it focuses a lot more on what the realm does to them over time. So when you see a member of the Underguts Mawtribe, rather than being these like, tough-skinned, tanned, massive hulks of flesh, they're still big, of course they are, but their skin is much more like sickly and pallid. They have a very kind of gross appearance about them. They kind of go from like a pale white to a necrotic green-ish. And they're all drooling. All of them, universally, their eyes are just kind of like glazed over. They're drooling. However, the reason for this is because the things that they eat in their environment, the huge bugs and all kinds of gross creatures that habitate the caves, mix slime and stuff, they eat them so much that it has an effect on their bodies. So if they eat a lot of poisonous animals, all of a sudden their drool is like dangerous to get into a wound. It becomes like a poison. And as they're just walking through these cave systems, eating anything around them, again, no sunlight, so that's why they're getting all nasty and pale looking, and then they stumble upon, say, a town or an outpost that seems to be very plentiful in the era of the beast, as is pointed out in the book, and a meal presents itself. And oftentimes what they'll do is simply do like this awesome action movie scene where they blow like a ring around the fortification and just kind of drop the whole thing down and just start attacking and eating them. Like they bring things down to them, which is so horrifying. I mean, of course, they'll go up in the air every once in a while if they need to come out and strike stuff, but the idea of, like, you can't possibly perceive us coming. Like, obviously the ground can shake and stuff like that on their approach, but no one really knows what is happening. You certainly would not first go to, there's a whole tribe of ogres underneath our feet. That's ridiculous. Now, a few things that this section also points out is they have the most Leadbelchers kind of like per capita, if you will. It's sort of like their unique selling proposition. I'm sure that other Mawtribes have Leadbelchers, like the actual cannons and stuff like that, but without a steady supply of gunpowder, sometimes those units are Leadbelchers and sometimes they're, I don't know, Tyrant Guard or something. Like they have to pick up a different weapon because there's no gunpowder. But for the Underguts, where their Gnoblars have found some way to kind of make a crude replacement, at least for gunpowder, approximation, if you will, well, any cannons that they collect that are still in working order are Leadbelcher units, just by definition. And they love the explosion. And I think that's definitely an aspect that is played up more in the story than in their actual lore section. Is just, it would be so cool if you're in a giant metal fort, underground in what I assume is a larger cavern, you start launching stuff, it's going to be peeling off of like metal walls, and then it's going to bounce around internally, and then like a drum hit the side of the cave wall. There would be so much noise and light. That sounds so rad. So they kind of definitely sound like a death metal, I don't know, Ogor Mawtribe, just for the sheer intensity of audio, I don't know, blasts. With that all said, let's start moving into why are the Underguts a really cool sub-faction within the Mawtribes. I think they really point out the variety of ways that hunger can be identified. So in some aspects, with other Mawtribes specifically being out and about, or being in specifically frozen winter areas, or maybe there's the Everwinter following them, the Underguts are unique because their version of hunger is kind of combined with the use of stealth and guile to get your opponent. There's almost a hunter aspect of, I'm hunting you. Of course, it's from underground. It's a subterranean hunt, which is its own kind of awesome. But here's the thing. Even if they went up above ground, it's the realm of shadows. The way we've described it before is you literally can't trust your own eyes. If you see a mountain and you start walking towards it, the mountain will start to move to the left or to the right to start and pull you off course. Like it's just doing strange illusionary things to you. So in a realm where you can't trust anything you see anyway, maybe the most trustworthy path is the one that you carve yourself. And that's such a neat, way to bring unique flavor to the realm of shadows specifically. And then the Mawtribe that's in there. Now, what I like about Age of Sigmar lore is that, there's going to be some book later on that has like a Hishian scholar be like, seems to be a lot of volcanic activity in this area, like not realizing he's looking at the concentric rings of a Mawpath. I think that would be hilarious. Other things that are noted here that I do want to point out that I like is that they seem to be good friends with the Gloomspite Gits, which just makes sense. I mean, they're cohabitating a lot of the same environments, and they would probably be familiar with a lot of their flora and fauna just by living in the same cave systems. I'm sure they've seen squigs or something like that before as well. And I really love the idea of a Gloomspite Gits army determining where they think the bad moon's going to be, and then hiring a mercenary company of Underguts to dig them the tunnel and be like, listen, you can have all the food you want. In fact, when you open the tunnel, it's going to be like rife with all kinds of good mushrooms to eat. Just go nuts! Knowing in their minds that this is going to unleash absolute hell, and the ogres are probably not going to be super jazzed about, having growths come out of them and stuff. Or they might love it. I don't know. I'm not here to judge. But anyway, Rusted Branch, thank you so much for leaving a comment and letting me know what you want to talk about. And if you have a sub-faction or character or something like that you would like explored, please leave in the comments down below, like and share the video because it really does help me as a content creator. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming.